Welcome to the Community Development Block Grant Advisory Meeting. Today's date is February 5th, 2008. Welcome, everyone. Can we have a roll call, please?
Advisory Member Zari Amirian.
Present.
Advisory Member Alec Baghdasarian.
Here.
Vice Chair Gary Cornell is absent. Advisory Member Efrain Olivares.
Here.
Chair Chang Lee.
Here. Can we have a report from Assistant Director regarding posting of agenda?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I would like to report that the agenda for the February 5th, 2008 meeting of the CDBG Advisory Committee was posted on Thursday, January 31st, 2008 on the bulletin board outside of City Hall.
Okay, I guess we can skip the minutes, or do we have the minutes? No? Okay. Item number 3, reports.
Yes, Mr. Chair, this will be my report to follow up on any items from our last meeting, which was last Wednesday, January 30th, and because of the short time span in between meetings, I use this opportunity to give you any oral reports to follow up on any items. And the first thing I'd like to mention is we did provide you with a copy of the list of recommendations that the committee developed last Wednesday regarding the social service programs. And we have forwarded the list of recommendations to the city manager's office and to the city council. We also provided you with a copy of the OMB circular, which relates to rules regarding the use of CDBG funds for fundraising activities. And that was at the request of Commissioner Baghdasarian. So you have that for your information. We also have a revised funding allocation plan, which is hopefully the final revised funding allocation plan. And you'll see that the amount available for capital improvement projects is down to $409,000. And then I also provided you with a copy of a letter that was sent to the chairman of the advisory committee from the executive director of Glendale Healthy Kids, providing comments on the agenda item concerning the requirement for subrecipients to obtain financial audits. So you have that for your consideration. And that's my report.
Since there's a second item, let's see a report regarding submission of the annual performance review CAPER. Is that by Ms. Creel?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. In your packet, we attach a copy of the city's 2006-2007 Consolidated Annual Performance and Evaluation Report, which we call the CAPER, which is a report on all the CDBG and also the HOME, which is the housing, HUD funding, and the ESG Emergency Shelter Grant, which is the homeless funding that the city received in 2006 and 2007. And that, again, explains it's a very long document which explains all the accomplishment data of the city. I would certainly pay particular attention for the CDBG sections on the tables 2 to 10. I'm sorry, pages 2 to 10. There's a matrix defining the one-year goals, actually the 5-year goals and what has been accomplished this past year and cumulative over the past 2 years. The narrative section is on page 87, which discusses the goals and, again, the accomplishments in a narrative sense and how much funds were expended over the past year on several of these CDBG projects, including projects that you'll see coming before you today. There's an evaluation of how we were able to meet some of our goals beginning on page 37, which will define, again, the CDBG program goals. But again, ultimately, the whole document consists of the housing, affordable housing programs, and the city's continuum of care homeless programs. But by and large, the CDBG program has made quite a accomplishment data. It's been pretty well accomplished last year, I should say. We met most of our goals, including all the youth programs and the other programs that we had identified in our consolidated plan. If there's any questions that I can ask or answer.
So next item is that to review our evaluation process, the interview. You have anything to report, or should we just talk about this? Mr. Duran?
I don't have
Okay.
anything to report.
So I guess what we'll do is that we'll listen to city projects, presented projects. I think there are 3 of them. And this is not for our evaluation, but just for information only. And then we have 3 capital improvement projects that we will discuss or we will review to make our decisions on. And do we have the evaluation sheet this time as well, or on?
Yes, Mr. Chair, you should have evaluation forms behind each of your proposals, as you did during the social service interviews.
So, we'll use that as a tool as well, and then we'll have some discussions, any questions that might arise from the interview. And then we'll, after the interview process, and then we'll get together to make our decisions. Yes.
If I may, before we proceed, just going back to this OMB circular very quickly, Mr. Duran, could you clarify, after reading this, I want to make sure I understand this correctly. The direct fundraising costs cannot be requested for CDBG funds, correct?
As a direct cost, correct.
But if fundraising is part of the responsibility of, say, the executive director, does the executive director then, are they not allowed to include that percentage of their salary in a request for CDBG funds?
Our understanding is that CDBG funds may be used to pay for fundraising activities if fundraising activities are part of an approved indirect cost allocation plan.
And how would some of these organizations go about getting that approved? Approved by HUD?
The indirect cost allocation plans would be approved by our office.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. Thank you.
If I may add something to that, I think that sometimes when nonprofits will hire a grant writer, for example, that's not an allowable cost.
Correct.
But if it's built into their program by one of the employees, then it is
Correct.
allowed.
And I'll give you an example, not that specifically applies to this particular issue, but the Housing Rights Center. They are a county-wide organization and provide tenant landlord counseling and discrimination investigations for the entire county. And they have a cost allocation plan that they use to invoice the city of Glendale. It's something like 2.5% of their entire operation. So if their entire operation includes a fundraising position, then we would be paying 2.5% of that position, and that is part of a pre-approved indirect cost allocation plan.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. Next, we move on to action items. Review and approve policy regarding requiring sub-recipients to obtain financial audits.
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you. This is a follow-up agenda item to your October 3rd, 2007 CDBG Advisory Committee meeting. At that time, we submitted a report and advised the committee that it had come to our attention by a number of agencies that the city's policy requiring independent financial audits of every agency that receives CDBG funds may be imposing a financial hardship or an undue financial burden on the agencies, especially organizations that receive relatively small grants from the city of Glendale. So we determined that it would behoove us to present this issue to the advisory committee and determine if the committee was interested in making a recommendation for a revised policy after understanding what the issues were on the part of the agencies, and a revised policy that could be recommended to the City Council and the Housing Authority for their final approval. And at that time, we did provide a couple of options to the current policy. One option was to require the independent financial audits only once every 2 years. Another option was to develop a threshold, and then those agencies below the threshold would not be required. Those agencies above would. The advisory committee at that time determined that it would like more time to consider the issue, and directed staff to provide more research on the issue. So we've done that. We've consulted further with our finance division and the city's internal auditor, Mr. Bill Fox, who is here to help provide background on how this was evaluated. Mr. Fox also assisted us in developing refining the options that we considered to be viable options to address this issue. So, and you all, of course, have been provided with a report. So, in short, the 5 options that we have deemed to be viable options under the CDBG guidelines, and in terms of addressing the city's needs as well as the agency's needs, would include 1, to retain the current policy, which requires all agencies to obtain financial audits. 2, to require independent financial audits only once every 2 years without any threshold consideration. 3 is to develop a grant amount threshold and require a CPA financial review for agencies below the threshold and a full-blown independent financial audit for agencies above the threshold. The idea here is that a CPA financial review is less stringent and requires less of an analysis on the part of a CPA than a full-blown financial audit, but would still entail a review by a CPA. So it would still provide assurances that an independent certified public accountant has reviewed financial records. And the other idea is that a CPA financial review does not cost as much as a full-blown financial audit. So we thought that would be a viable alternative to an audit. And again, this could be with or without a threshold consideration. Then the 4th option is to develop a threshold, and we are providing an example of $25,000, which seems to be if there was an industry standard nationwide, what we've seen most prevalent is the $25,000 threshold. So, for example, if we take the $25,000 threshold, then grant amounts of $25,000 or less would not require an independent financial audit. However, if one is already being performed to meet broader agency reporting requirements, then of course we would request a copy of those financial audits. And then in lieu of an independent financial audit, agencies would be required to submit unaudited financial statements for years where grant funds are received. The unaudited financial statements provided would include an itemization of the receipt and use of CDBG funds, and an attestation statement would be provided by the Chief Executive Officer that the financial statements being submitted are true, correct, and free of any material misstatement, and that funds were spent following the CDBG grant requirements. Then agencies above the threshold or receiving over $25,000 in city CDBG funds would be required to conduct and submit independent financial audits for the fiscal years in which they receive funds. And then a 5th option would be for the city to solicit one CPA firm to contract with and provide auditing services for a bundle of nonprofits. The idea being that if we were able to provide a CPA firm with 4 or 5 nonprofits that would agree to contract with that same firm, that we may be able to get discounted rates on their services, and then we could the city could be responsible for facilitating that, although, as is pointed out in the report, the city could not be responsible for being the contracting agency because that would be a conflict of interest, because we do have to maintain an arm's length distance from the service providers because we're the funders and we're the monitors. And so, and I know that was an option that was discussed at our last meeting. So those are the options. As I indicated earlier, the chairman did receive a letter from one of the agencies to weigh in on this issue, and we probably heard from others since our last meeting. So that's our report. And again, I'd like to note, make a couple notes. We do, one of the things that we talked about with in our meetings with the internal audit staff, the finance division, is to remember that we do conduct annual financial monitoring. And I provided you with a copy of the guidelines that we follow, which are prescribed by HUD, and they're pretty good guidelines. So if the question is, if there are problems or issues, will they be detected at the time that we do the financial monitoring, or would we have to wait until a financial audit to learn that? And the answer is, if they're having issues, we'll find out about it way in advance of a financial audit. And as you know, financial audits don't come in until 6 months after the end of the year anyway. So actually, financial monitoring is probably the best tool as it relates to that. As the internal auditor would tell you, the certified financial audit is more of an insurance policy that an independent professional trained in reviewing financial statements and reviewing control systems, financial management systems, has reviewed the financial data and certified that it is good data without any issues, or they will identify the issues. So that's our report, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Duran. Before we discuss on this item, do you have anything to add, Mr. Fox?
Thank you for asking me. I worked very closely with Mr. Duran and staff to help develop the different options. We took a very broad look of what, as Mr. Duran said, other agencies are doing. And quite frankly, the $25,000 threshold was one that we saw doing what I consider an extensive Internet search, looking at other comparable agencies throughout the United States. Federal guidelines require, if you get a grant of $25,000 or less, as a regular recipient, not a sub-recipient, that you're not required to have an audit for that purpose. So that was kind of the guideline that Mr. Duran felt would be good for option number 4. And the important factor that Mr. Duran really presented was the fact that there's ongoing financial monitoring being done by the city. So it's kind of an early warning signal if something's not being done correctly. And that gives the agency the opportunity to correct the deficiency prior to the completion of the grant being fully funded. So we really feel that that's probably a very good approach, continuing the rigorous monitoring that goes on at this point. And then the city is well aware that small dollar grant amounts aren't grants that it's not cost effective to spend a large amount of money on auditing when you want to really spend that money on providing services to the community. So the $25,000 threshold, if you're asking me for my personal opinion and professional opinion, I think option 4 would be the one that I would gravitate towards, because it provides the most money in the pocket of the agencies to do the work that they're trying to do.
Thank you, Mr. Fox. Have any questions for Mr. Fox?
Go ahead, Efren.
Just a couple. Thank you for being here. Under option 4, I suppose we could also include language that if, as they're doing the reviews of an agency and problems arise, that we as a body could require a financial audit at the end of the year.
I think that it's a good option or something that you could add on to option number 4 as an additional assurance that the funds are being spent properly. In past dealings that I've had in similar situations, what we found is through the monitoring process, we will catch those types of errors. And my internal audit staff has actually worked in conjunction with the community development staff on a couple of these occasions. as the monitoring process, because, one, we wanted to know what it actually is done in the monitoring process so that we were comfortable with it as the internal audit group. But also, we wanted to make sure that they had the proper skill sets for the people that are doing the monitoring. And we found that the people that were doing the monitoring were capable and had the skill sets. Your suggestion of maybe interjecting if there's a problem to then call for an audit, I think it's a good one. I don't see any reason why anybody receiving the funds would not agree to that.
And one clarification on their 5, I wanted to be clear on this. If the city was to bundle some nonprofits and, according to the language here, solicit a CPA firm, the actual cost to the CPA firm would be paid by the nonprofits, not the city, correct?
Yes, it would be as if you were contracting independently. The city would be only doing that as a service to try to get a volume discount.
So that
but
they would still incur the cost.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Mr. Fox, thanks for your input. Couple questions. Did you review an example of one of the organizations, what type of financials that we're dealing with here when you made your recommendations?
I have in the past, not on this specifically to this report. I have in the past. We've actually been involved in a couple of the grants, and we would actually go out with the different monitors to see what was actually occurring. And it's not so much financial. One, we want to make sure the internal controls of the organization are sound. But two, the money's being spent in accordance with the grant requirements. So it's one, are you operating with the proper checks and balances as far as an internal control perspective? But on top of that, the other thing that we really are concerned about, that you're spending the money correctly. We don't want to spend the money on something that would later be considered a disallowed item.
Could you, and just a follow-up question, could you estimate, because you suggested a CPA review instead of an audit, could you estimate maybe how much that might cost one of these organizations?
No, no CPA is going to give you a number without actually going in and taking a look
Sure.
at the actual books and records of the operation and do a certain amount of discussion with the Chief Executive Officer and Chief Financial Officer. What the review does is primarily an analytic procedures, and it doesn't get into the detailed vouching and testing of internal controls that would be necessary. It's a good way to get some assurance, but not the same as a full audit.
But, could you give us any idea of, the amount of time it takes to do something like that for an organization, for example, that's funded at $25,000 or less?
It's a tricky question, and I'll tell you why. If you have an organization that's funded at $25,000 or less, if it's a small organization that does not have a lot of activity, then in fact what you have is a very simple audit. But let's say that you have a large entity that's getting multiple grants from multiple sources as well as donations from the community. Then you're looking at a much wider breadth, because you can't just focus your audit. If you're doing an independent audit, you're going to be looking at the entire entity, not just your particular program. So I don't want to dance around the question, but it's very hard without looking at the entity in its total state as opposed to just looking at an isolated grant.
I think large organizations that he's referring to, they do their audits anyway, that's required. I think what we're trying to protect here is a small, entities that do not have the capabilities of or can afford to have the audit done. So I think we're referring to those, organizations that are small in nature.
Yes, and frankly, CPAs do their work on an hourly basis. Many of them will come in and give you a fixed bid for the work that they believe is required. On a small job, they may want to go on an hourly basis in order to, because they may not know if it takes 10 hours to do an audit or it may take 20 hours, and if you bid a fixed number, you may in fact find that you exceed it, and it's not a cost-effective assignment that you've undertaken.
Now, just for clarification, when you refer to audit, you're talking about either the CPA review or a full, extensive audit.
In either case, whether you're doing a review or an audit, a CPA is going to want to come in and take a look at the books and records, and will have several questions that they will pose prior to undertaking an engagement.
Now, do you think any amount more than the 25,000 would be recommendable as far as a threshold is concerned?
In my opinion, I think 25,000 would be defendable. The reason I say 25,000 is the search that we conducted determined that the federal grant guidelines, if you were a regular recipient of 25,000 or less, you're not required to have an audit. That's a pretty good threshold from which you can defend. If you start moving the threshold level up, then you're really not in line with what the federal requirements would be. Your difference is slightly because you're talking as a subrecipient versus a recipient. And you're actually would be relaxing the requirements on a subrecipient that as a regular recipient that you would be required to make. So our feeling was to try to keep it in line, the 25,000, because that's defendable with what the federal guidelines are. And what benchmarking we were able to come up with, we found out that the other cities are doing the same thing. 25,000 was the threshold number that they were using.
The 25,000 seems like a reasonable number. Looking at what we've allocated last week, only 7 of the organizations are receiving more than that. So I can see that we'll be protecting a lot of the small recipients. As far as the audited financial versus having a CPA review, perhaps we can even look into the possibility of still providing the CPA, I guess, the services of a certified public accountant, either for the folks that do need the audited financial or even for the review of the financials. Maybe we can still bring some savings to these organizations in addition to putting the threshold of $25,000.
And the question I would have, just to follow up what Mr. Bagdasarian asked, stated, is does the city have the facilities to conduct these CPA reviews for some of these smaller organizations?
The city itself would not be considered independent because, in fact, we're the ones that are the recipient of the grant and are passing the money on.
I see.
So it would not be an independent relationship that you're seeking. If you're suggesting that the city could provide some lists of CPAs that do these types of audits, we'd be more than happy to provide that. The point that Mr. Duran brought is, do we really want to get to that level where we're dictating what CPA firm these agencies would be using or entities would be using? That's something that the committee would want to consider. My feeling is if you can recommend firms that you know that are capable, local firms that are willing to provide the services and are doing it maybe at a reduced rate because it is a nonprofit situation, that's what we would be seeking.
Well, not only that, the CPA, if they're performing this review for others, perhaps the process would be streamlined for them and they can do it quicker, if you will, than saving some hours as opposed to one that hasn't done this type of work.
I concur. I think that if you want to get a CPA firm to do any work, you want to get one that specializes and has the experience in that particular area. And there are a number of CPAs that actually are involved in nonprofit organizations and that they would love to have an opportunity to work with other agencies.
Isn't there an issue with recommending outside organizations? I know that other departments in the city, Public Works, Building Department, Planning, they shy away from recommending any outside independent contractors.
My preference would be to let the firms, the agencies that you're talking about, seek their own CPA firms. I don't think that it would be a problem because you would not be contracting with those firms, that you would merely provide a list of service providers that have that skill set or capability and let the agency actually do their own interviewing and selection process. The city doesn't want to be involved in trying to be big brother on this. I think these agencies should have the responsibility of picking a firm that they're comfortable with. For the vast majority of the larger agencies, as Mr. Duran had indicated, people already have a auditor or they have a CPA firm that they're doing work with on an ongoing basis. So the issue probably is only a very few number of people.
Yeah, I'm just, honestly, I'm just concerned about the smaller organizations, and that's why I'm trying to figure out, what the most cost-effective option would be here. I know that the city, according to what you've said, the city then itself needs to get, yearly audits from an independent source on various city projects or programs. Isn't that right?
Yeah, the city is responsible for having an annual audit, which we do. There's also single audits that are performed, and many of the grants are selected by the outside auditor in the process of doing their annual audit. Not necessarily a CDBG grant, but it could be any one of the other grants that the city is involved in would be selected for detailed testing. The important thing to know is that the city is monitoring as we go through. Before all the funds are spent, if there is a problem, we will be on top of it. And that's the beauty of the monitoring process that goes on. And frankly, the risk level is very low. When you're looking at agencies under $25,000, you have monitoring, ongoing monitoring taking place, and then you have an attestation that would be done by the chief executive officer of that organization. I think that you've got all the bases covered. And at the same time, what you're doing is you're allowing more money to go into the recipient's pockets, which is to be spent on funds for the community, which is what Mr. Duran was doing when he developed recommendation number 4. He felt that this would allow the best of all worlds. You want to have the comfort that the money's being spent properly, but at the same time, you want to know that we have a comfort level based upon 2 controls. Control number 1 is the ongoing monitoring that takes place, and 2, that the chief executive officer is attesting to the accuracy of the financial statements. And, ultimately, if there was a problem that did occur, then the subrecipient would, the city would go after the subrecipient for any funds that would be spent not in compliance.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Fox.
Thank you.
Just for clarification, the $25,000, is that less than equal to $25,000? So does that include $25,000 or does it exclude $25,000? I think that needs to be clarified.
25,000 or less, or 25,000 and more?
Because I think that makes a lot of difference.
It would. And my recommendation would be $25,000 or less.
Okay.
So,
That
yeah.
doesn't mean next year you're going to start awarding 24.
Exactly, 24,999, yeah.
Right. Okay, well,
I would certainly support option 4 with the condition that that if there was an issue with an organization, that a financial audit would be required. The question would then be, would we give staff the ability to require that, or do we do it as a body?
Mr. Chair, what we can do is, for organizations that we review and have determined that they have financial systems findings, we can make a report to you, and maybe together we can determine if for the next year we're going to require a financial audit for that particular organization for that particular year.
So either way, it would come back to us. So again, then
Absolutely.
I would support 4 with the condition that the CDBG committee would, with a report from staff, would require a financial audit if issues arose.
So we have a motion?
I just wanted to say, I would support that as well. I think we need to focus on the reason behind this. We're trying to, as Mr. Duran stated and as Mr. Fox stated, these audits are insurance policies, basically. And you don't want to spend 15, 20, 30% of your budget on an insurance policy. It's not cost effective. It doesn't make sense. What I'm trying to understand, if we're trying to, help these smaller organizations be as cost effective as possible and spend these funds where they're supposed to be spent, given the notion that's underlying in option 5, the idea that if you bundle work together, you save money. I'm trying to understand why we can't combine, say, option 4 and option 5, saying, you know what, if you're $25,000 or less, it needs to be reviewed by a CPA. Well, the city itself gets an independent an outside organization to review its financials, a bunch of city programs, stuff like that. Wouldn't the most cost-effective option then be to have that outside independent auditor then take a look at some of these smaller organizations as well as part of the duties? Is that a possibility? I'm sorry to bring you back up here into the spotlight, Mr. Fox, but this is an important issue.
That's not a problem. The concept that you have is a good one, and unfortunately, there is not a contractual relationship between our CPA firm and then also these particular agencies. And there's no way that we'd be able to tell if our CPA firm would be interested in performing work for all these other nonprofit agencies. Frankly, I, like you, feel that the most cost-effective way is the way we want to do it and provide the most money in the individual agencies' pockets. The feeling of what Mr. Olivares came up with meets the spirit of what you're trying to reach by saying if we see a problem with the small ones under $25,000, we want to have a stop and then have somebody come in and take a look at it for us. I think that meets what your requirement is as part of option 5, because I think what he's done is done a good job of blending 4 and 5 together. Because ultimately what we were looking at from a city's perspective, we want control. We don't want the money to be spent inappropriately, because that means that if the city gets audited, then we will end up having to pay the shortfall that exists.
Sure.
So we have a vested interest in making sure that it's done correctly. I feel very confident in the monitoring process that the city has in place. I also feel that $25,000 is a very, very low level of risk. And the agencies that we deal with here in this city have a vested interest in spending the money appropriately. And in addition, they don't want the public embarrassment of doing something incorrectly that goes along with it. So I feel very comfortable with Mr. Olivares' suggestion of put a stop in there. If we see something wrong, come back to you guys for guidance and advice on how to best to proceed.
The only issue that I see, the $25,000 seems reasonable as a grant amount to put as a threshold. I would like to see if we can add another condition where we not only check the $25,000 grant amount paid by the city, but we also look at the total budget of that organization or total budget of that specific program to also look into that. I mean, we talked about, trying to help the smaller organization, and yes, if it's a multi-million-dollar company, they do get audited financials because of many other reasons. The smaller organizations that, regardless of $25,000, $30,000, or $35,000, that audited financial fee becomes a much bigger portion of their annual. And so if we can also build a second condition that it's either $25,000 or X percent of their, that $25,000 makes up X percent of their annual budget for that program, then they're still excluded. I would feel a lot more comfortable, because if it's a $50,000 program, then versus $200,000, $400,000.
Well, I frankly hadn't thought of that particular wrinkle that you're suggesting. I think that the main thing is that the $25,000, you don't want to move that threshold up from $25,000 to $50,000 based on a percentage of total budget. We want to be able to still maintain our control, and frankly, the city wants to feel that we're following the spirit of what the federal guidelines are. The federal guideline is $25,000 or less. We want to stay within that same framework. I don't feel as comfortable moving a percentage of the budget up to $50,000 or $75,000. And I do think your suggestion of, as part of the upfront submittal that comes into place, that we have that idea of what maybe the agency's total expenditures of, their total operation is, so that we know how relevant that grant is as part of the total operation. I think that that's a good idea, to have a perspective. Is this a big revenue source, or is it a small revenue source to the individual entity that we're dealing with? But again, I would kind of be very cautious of trying to go beyond the $25,000 limit.
Well, my thing was not as much of how much of their revenues, how much of their expenses. So if their entire expense is 50, I guess it's one and the same. If their entire expense is for $40,000, and for whatever reason we've elected to pay them $25,000 or $25,001. Now that $5,000 will become a much bigger percent of that $40,000. That's what I was.
Well, you got a good point.
Just here, I have a couple of comments. What we learned in conducting our research, because we were trying to get a gauge of what the difference in price might be between a CPA review and a full-blown financial audit and some other variations. And actually, Irina did most of the research, but what we were told by the CPA firms that we surveyed was that a lot of times it depends on their familiarity with the organization. If they're familiar with the organization, if they've been contracting with them for a number of years, then it's easier and they don't have to charge as much. If it's a brand new organization, they're not familiar with them, they really have to delve into their systems and do a lot of research and analysis, then they would tend to charge more. So the agencies are probably better off. Those that are already obtaining financial audits, and most of them are, if not all of them, already have an established relationship and are probably already getting the best price that they can get from their CPA firms. And so I'm not sure if it would be worth our while to, try to develop something new or to fix something that isn't necessarily broken. The other point I'd like to make is I think I gave you an example of if we were to look at the current list of projects that are funded, of the 13, I think 7 would fall under the threshold, and of the 7, there's at least 2 or 3 that obtain a financial audit anyway that would be providing us with copies of the financial audit. So it's really, in the final analysis, it's really just 3 or 4 agencies that are helped by this new policy, and that would be a big help, for them. So agencies that are big will be getting financial audits anyway, and we'll be getting copies of them.
Efren, if you want to make the motion, I'll support it. Thank you, Mr. Fox.
Thank you. I do have a question. Whatever we approve today, when does it actually become effective?
We will be submitting a report to the City Council and Housing Authority for either April 1st or April 8th, and we will include this recommendation by the committee in that report, so it would be effective July 1st with the new program.
New program. Yeah. So programs like Club Jam, who went over that threshold this year, need to be cautioned that this is a new requirement. And it's going to impact them a little bit more than they're used to, but they're also getting more funding than.
Yeah, they actually provide us with financial audits already.
Okay.
Yeah, as small as they are, they've managed to.
Okay, that's all I have. My motion was for number 4 with the requirement that we review and we require any audits that should problems arise with a particular organization.
I will second that motion.
Roll call, please.
Advisory Member Zaria Amirian.
Aye.
Advisory Member Alec Bardasarian.
Yes.
Advisory Member Efren Olivares.
Yes.
Chairman Changley.
Aye. Okay, I guess we can start the interview process.
Thank you, Mr. Fox.
Thank you. This is going to be more presentations initially than interviews, right?
Right.
First part of the presentation is more of the more information session. Can we have the code enforcement program come up, please?
I think we had requested that the city, the pre-designated projects actually come and present there, so we have some baseline of comparison, and we appreciate that, by the way.
Yeah, thank you.
Great. Chair Lee, members of the advisory committee.
Sorry.
I'm here. My name is Sam Engel. I'm the Neighborhood Services Administrator for the City of Glendale. I administer the city's code enforcement program, one part of which is the CDBG code enforcement program that we operate in the 2 census tracts in southern Glendale. With me this morning is Stephen Kosis. Stephen is an administrative analyst in Neighborhood Services who has helped prepare the applications that we did for CDBG. He helps monitor them, and he is also one of our hearing officers in Neighborhood Services for our code enforcement program. Unlike the graffiti removal program, which is a citywide program, which we discussed last time I was here, the city operates 2 distinct code enforcement programs. The citywide program, which is funded by the general fund and by housing money, and the Southern Glendale Code Enforcement Program, which is funded by the Community Development Block Grant Program. For our new members, and a little bit of review for everybody else that's here, the city employs staff to ensure that our neighborhoods are consistent high quality, both in the public and private part of the city, private property, public property. And this is called the city's code enforcement program. We are not unlike any other city in Southern California, except to the degree that we staff our code enforcement program, which is substantially less than any other city in Southern California. In Glendale, we're a little different than most of these other code enforcement programs in that we have a city council adopted policy that we will stress compliance over punitive actions before we start a legal process. Staff always attempts to educate residents and property owners about code standards, and then if that is not successful, utilize an administrative process to compel compliance with the city's codes. And in fact, we actually enforce the majority of what we do is city codes, although the council has authorized our staff to enforce certain state codes, in particular reference to cigarette and tobacco smoking, and there's a couple other ones that we do. Shopping carts, kind of an esoteric area. Only when our efforts are not successful to problem solve or to work with people do we begin any effort to do any legal action, even though by right a violation of the municipal code is a strict liability offense and can be prosecuted on the day that the actual violation occurs. The program has been very successful. It's actually one of the two original CDBG programs. The other one was the graffiti removal program, which is no longer part of the CDBG program. And the code enforcement, two of the original programs that were funded by Community Development Block Grant. It's been particularly successful. Any of you who have been in Glendale for any period of time, but in particular since 1990, if you would close your eyes and remember what Southern Glendale looked like in 1990 and look at it now, the significant change in that community came from two parts. One, through the city's efforts to upgrade properties through the code enforcement program, and the partnership with the private property industry to see those properties turn around. And there's a significant change. And the result is directly attributable to the CDBG investment in those neighborhoods. As a matter of fact, if you look at where we were 15 years ago, the CDBG program actually had far more eligible neighborhoods. We actually went into neighborhoods almost all the way up to Glen Oaks. As those neighborhoods have improved and turned around, the eligible neighborhoods have actually gotten smaller and smaller, so that now we are in the areas in the very southern part of the city. In terms of how our code enforcement program works, we have staff that are assigned to different geographic regions of the city. They're not deployed all over the city. A particular staff is assigned to a particular part of the city, and they are required to institute code enforcement action as a result of their personal observations, in addition to responding through what might come in over the telephone or over the internet. In each area, each one of these areas, we have a staff of 3. We have a neighborhood services inspector who is certified by the International Code Council and has powers of arrest. We have a neighborhood services field representative who is the problem solver mediator. And then we have a customer service representative who does all of the citizen interface with the requests and processing, and also handles all of the paperwork for what the inspector and the field representative do. Of the 4 areas in the city of Glendale, there are 2 that are funded by Community Development Block Grant. The Tropico neighborhood, which is south of Colorado, west of Brand, if you can envision that, and the Somerset neighborhood, which is south of Broadway and east of Brand. Staff do more than wait for the telephone to ring, as I said before, and they have different performance measures that they are required to meet in their individual areas. Most significant direction that they receive is that they are personally responsible for how their area looks and how it's maintained, because a lot of what we do is purely subjective. You can drive into a neighborhood and say, this neighborhood looks good. You can drive into it 2 weeks later and say, this neighborhood looks bad. We hold staff personally responsible for the care and maintenance of the neighborhood to their assigned. Number 2, they're instructed to be problem solvers rather than just code inspectors. It's very easy to pull out the checklist and go down and look down the list and say, that wall needs painted, that porch is falling off its foundation. They are responsible to say, all right, that porch may be falling off its foundation. Here's some things you can do to fix that, so that they guide people towards compliance. They're expected to assist all of the people that might be in violation in their efforts to gain compliance. As I said before, our code enforcement program has been very effective over the years in bringing these substandard properties up to code and maintaining older structures up to the city's accepted standards. A couple things about our city. We are a built-out city. Any given time, there are only, excepting the hillsides, there are only about 70 vacant lots in Glendale. I have about 30,000 parcels of land. So what we have is what we have to take care of. And the code enforcement program is very integral into understanding that. We're different than Santa Clarita or Moreno Valley, where they've got plenty of land to build on. We don't. We are entirely confined. What we have is what we have to maintain. Always, as I said with the graffiti program, and I will stress it here, part of our job is to raise expectations. That we want people in all neighborhoods of the city to have the expectation that they have a neighborhood that they're proud to live in and that they want to live in. And that's part of what we do through our code enforcement program. We always think we've got a little ways to go or we wouldn't be back here asking to continue the program. You know, in some respects it's raising the bar a little bit each year. But our CDBG investment over the years in code enforcement and our efforts has really turned around the neighborhoods in southern Glendale. And I would encourage you to endorse the council's recommendation and continue our funding. We're here and we have all kinds of statistics if you want. They're kind of dull, but I've got them if you need them.
I just have a quick question. What's the total city budget for code enforcement for the entire city?
I'm going to go through it. I'm working on that right now. We get about $400,000 from CDBG, more or less, hopefully more. We get about $1.1 million from the housing budget. And we get about, I have to minus graffiti and a couple other things out, about $600,000 out of the city's general fund.
About a $2 million budget.
A little bit more. It's about 2.4, actually.
I have a couple of comments. And Sam is correct, because I happen to get a lot of calls sometimes from homeowners who have received a letter from one of your inspectors, and I in turn will make a call for them and follow up on their cases. And what Sam says is exactly correct. It's a very proactive, very good conversation, and usually issues do get resolved. And when I first came to Glendale, I lived in South Glendale. I lived on Maple, across from Maple Park. I used to manage an apartment building for disabled adults, and I saw the change as this density increased and the problems, and so I've always supported this program. Also wanted to say that, I want to say again that the fact that we didn't support the graffiti under a week ago has nothing to do with the validity of the program. It rather has to do with we think it should be funded somewhere else, and we'll continue to say that. So you definitely run a good program.
We like you.
And the program.
And the program. Yeah, we just don't think it should be funded through the CDBG, but that's neither here nor there.
Right.
We appreciate you coming out. Any other questions?
No,
Thank you very much.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
you so much.
Next, we have a Pacific Park Pool Project. Can you please come up? Start it up.
Good morning, Chairman Lee, committee members, city staff. I'm Peter Verheilig. I'm the project manager for the Pacific Park Pool Project. And I'd like to go through a brief PowerPoint. We'll try to be brief and just go over the high points. We'll describe the project for those of you who aren't familiar with it. I'll summarize the budget and tell you where we are with its regarding the schedule. As you can see, the project site is in South Glendale. It's very close to San Fernando Road. It's between San Fernando Road and Pacific, south of Vine, in an area that is very underserved and would benefit greatly from this community pool. The scope we're proposing is for a community pool about 25 yards by 6 lanes. Because of budgetary constraints, we're looking at a fairly simple layout. There is hope that the city could do a larger aquatic center at a later date, but due to our budgetary constraints, this is what we're going for. Plus, this park used to have a pool. It was very popular. And during the development of the Pacific Edison School Park project, I can't really speak for that process. I wasn't here yet, but it was determined that the pool should be removed, and it's been greatly missed. The pool would also incorporate ADA access, whether it's mechanical or through a zero-depth entry sort of ramp. There would also be a building that would accommodate lockers, restrooms, and mechanical systems. And also, there is currently a children's play area where the pool will go, and that will need to be replaced in a different location. And if you know the park, it's going to go where the picnic, it's not shown here, but there's a picnic area to the west on Kenilworth, and there's a lawn area there where we can take the play area that was formerly here and shift it over there, and it'll actually benefit from that relocation because it'll be close to the picnic tables where families can have their picnics and watch their children play. You can see that this is just a feasibility layout. This doesn't reflect the final design. It was just to prove that we could fit this pool and the infrastructure there. So we've got a 6-lane pool. We've got a building off to the northeast there that would have the offices. And bathhouse is kind of a generic term that means lockers, restrooms, and all that stuff. It would have the decking as required by code and a shade shelter. And again, this is just a feasibility diagram, so we hope that it will be much more appealing than this actually when it's done. Our goals are to provide these programs for South Glendale, including open swim, instruction, different American Red Cross programs, and the pool will provide employment for young people, and also a place for sports and recreation, and also for senior programming, low-impact aerobics and such. This is the neighborhood to be served. It's Census Tract 3023.02. It's very urbanized. And the thing is, it's very urbanized. It's also adjacent to the highest need areas. So right next to it is the highest density area in Glendale. Also, the median income is $25,000 to $50,000 a year, but it's adjacent to areas that are among the lowest in the city. So you can see that if any neighborhood is deserving of a pool, this is the one. This is our budget right now. We've got $1.4 million in place. We're anticipating another $4 million with the 2 CDBG grants and the Roberto Zeberg Harris grant and the per capita grant. And that brings our total funding in 2009 to about $5.4 million, and that's just about $50,000 over what our estimate for the total development cost for the pool is. So with this grant in place, we'll be in good shape. So that concludes my presentation. Oh, I'm sorry. Schedule. You can see we've been through the program assessment where we decided which area of the city would best benefit from the first new pool, and we've got that feasibility concept in place. The environmental approvals are in progress. The EIF has been circulated throughout the city, and it's been revised to accommodate their comments, and the planning department is now processing it for a notice of determination. Right now, we've got the design consultant on board under contract, and we are going to have them begin analysis and gathering input from city staff and from the community. They'll be conducting a workshop with the community. And then after that's done, hopefully by summer, we'll be getting into design development and move on from there. And we look to be constructing the project starting in the winter of 2009 and completing it within a year. Do you have any questions for me?
I do. Thank you for the presentation. One question, when we also supported the Pacific Edison project, and I think you stated you were not around at the time, but we always had a concern that cost exceeded, they kept going up as the time went on, and ultimately you would probably be back here requesting more funding. When we look at the budget now, it looks like you're right there, but I didn't see contingency. I also didn't see any architectural engineering cost, and they may be in there, I just didn't see them.
Actually,
So I want to get a little better picture of where you're going to be, and that we truly do have the funds covered, and if they are not, if a year from now you need another 500,000, what would the target organization be that would pay for those? Would it be here, or would it be the CIP?
I'm not, I don't have that information, and I forgot to express my regrets from the director, George Chapchin. He had a conflict. Apparently, there's some CIP emergencies throughout the city, and they're having a meeting with the city manager today. So I can't really speak to that, but I can say that this estimate includes every soft cost that we could anticipate: staff time, architectural engineering, permits, inspections. It's also got escalation built in to a construction start in 2009. So we've tried to anticipate every possible cost that we will incur over the course of the project.
Okay, I'm glad to hear that, which wasn't evident on looking at the presentation, but if you have those built in, then yeah, good luck.
Thank you.
Now, according to the budget that you showed, this would be the last time you would be asking for CDBG funds?
That is correct.
I have a question. From the schematic, I cannot tell, but I guess I'm one of those newcomers who really likes to learn about the project. From what I see in the schematic, is it open? Does it have a roof over it, structure over it?
Oh, no. With the budget we have, it would be impractical to have it indoors. So it's an outdoor pool.
Well, if we're spending over $5 million, well, what was the, did you have a cost estimate for having an indoor pool?
No. The direction I got was to develop this as an outdoor pool because of that budget, and to, since we are currently also exploring the possibility of an aquatic center, that is where that sort of pool would likely be built, with more amenities, including possibly indoor-outdoor.
Yeah, because obviously with the indoor you have a full year-round, use of the pool, whereas this, you get something like 5 months of the year.
Actually, it's closer to 8 or 9 months, but the pool could be heated and used year-round. In the climate we have here, I've swam in pools in the wintertime. Your feet get a little cold on the way out to the pool, but the pool's heated.
And global warming, right? Right. Now, I have another question. What impact would it have on the actual project, since it's slated to be completed in the winter, basically, early first quarter of 2011, right? That's the.
Right.
What type of impact would it have on the project if, since this is the last year you're asking for CDBG funds, if you received, a large percentage of those funds this year and asked for the remainder next year? Would that have any substantive impact on your project?
Not immediately, because at this point, for the next year, we'll be looking at development of the project, design, and gearing up for construction. So you're right, it wouldn't have an immediate effect. The only thing I can think of is the council being more likely to vote in favor of the project on a continuing basis, knowing that funding is all in place.
I see, but for all intents and purposes, if you received, $800,000 this year, just for example, and then asked for the remaining $400,000 next year, that would have no real substantive effect on your ability to complete the pool by the first quarter of 2011.
No.
So why are you asking for the full $1.2 million? Why is council? Do you have any input?
I'm sorry, I don't have that information, but is this information that I could get to Jess and Moises and forward to the committee?
We would appreciate that. Thank you.
All right.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
The one issue that would create is that the project would not be, as it's planned, would not be fully funded. So it would leave a funding gap. So the city council would have to determine that it would be okay to carry over that funding gap until next year, and then figure out how to close that funding gap, whether it's next year's CDBG funds or next year's CIP funds, or that it would like to see a project, when it approves a project, it would like to see it fully funded. with a funding strategy in place that covers all the costs. So that would be something the council would have to consider when we do a report.
But, Mr. Duran, if you could put up the budget screen, I think it was the screen before.
Yeah, it was.
They're anticipating of getting CIP funding in fiscal year '09 and 2010.
Correct.
Of $1.4 million.
Correct.
So it wouldn't be fully funded anyway until that time.
Correct, but in the way the city's CIP budget planning works is departments are required to submit a 10-year CIP budget. So they would have to show that over the 10-year term, this project is fully funded. They would have to show a strategy for how to fund this project. So they would have to make an adjustment somewhere down the line, whether it's with CIP or CDBG.
I'm still unclear on that. I mean,
Well, I think what you're suggesting is that the strategy changed slightly by allotting the funds later as opposed to this year. I think that's all you're saying, right?
I mean, what I'm concerned about is I have 3 more projects coming today, and the total far exceeds what's available because of the pre-designated funds. We've had a proposal or a presentation here today that states that there would be no substantive impact in the completion of the project by the target date if some of those funds were to come next year. We're not expecting CDBG to be revoked, right, in 2008, 2009, 2010?
No.
No.
Okay, so for example, what you're suggesting is potential of deferring CDBG funds from the current year to next year. Say, for example, moving $400,000 from 08-09 to 09-10.
I don't think there's been a suggestion yet. I think it's an idea, and I honestly think that we should probably leave this for our deliberations.
Right.
We've had a presentation on the project.
Sure.
I was just, I'm just trying to understand exactly, what our options are here. But I appreciate it. You've answered all the questions that we can ask you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
If I may add, the stipulation I look at as a project manager is when we put this project before council in hopefully the summer of 2009, that's when we'll have to demonstrate that we have all the funding we need to construct the project. That's when we hope to take it to bid.
I'm sorry, when was this?
Summer of 2009.
And you said that you want to have the funding,
It needs to be-
secured or
Correct.
okay.
Yeah, for them to approve the project, we need to show in the report that we have identified all the funds, they're in place, and these are the account numbers where they are available. All right.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can we have West Glendale ADA curb, ramp, and sidewalk project people come up?
I like this better. Who needs computers, right?
These handouts are what I have there on the home board.
Thank you.
It's not here.
Yeah, he'll be here.
Was he coming?
Yeah, later.
Good morning. My name is Dennis Ambayak from Public Works Engineering. We're here to present our project, West Glendale ADA Curb Ramp and Sidewalk Installation Project, Phase 2. Our project scope of work for this project is we'd like to construct new sidewalks, wheelchair access ramps, in the, also, we'd like to also replace damaged sidewalks, gutters, and curbs in the general area. And also, we'd like to also remove some existing trees, overgrown trees, mature trees that are in the general area, and plant new street trees. And we'd also like to also refurbish the street with a type of street rehabilitation of called slurry seal. So our project location is bounded by. It's on your. It's on the. It's on the next sheet. That were in the handouts. The project location is basically bounded by the freeway on the west side, the freeway I-5 on the west side, Allen Avenue on the north side, San Fernando Road on the east side, and basically the LA River or Flower Street here on the south side. There are some residential areas there within an industrial zone area and also an R2250 area. The population within that general area is 370. So we'd like to assist there. Our goal for this project is to improve the quality of life for ADA accessibility. Also improve safety by installation of sidewalks so people don't walk on the streets. Currently, there are no sidewalks, so it's either people walk on the perceived private lawns, which is not a private property, it's public right-of-way, or they walk on the street themselves. So making it some kind of a safety issue. By the installation of sidewalks. Also, we are also encouraging outdoor activities such as walking or jogging in the general area. Also, we are also encouraging neighborhood interaction. So as in the fast-paced life we have here in Southern California, most people are indoors anyway. But especially if there's no sidewalks, people are not really encouraged to go out there and walk around and talk to the neighbors. So by the installation of sidewalks and curb ramps, it'll be another step forward to having people go outside and talk to the neighbors. Also, our project estimates are for this project. We estimate the construction project to be around $1 million. So, and if we are going to be granted some CDBG funding of $125,000, we will also use some of our CIP funds to finish the project, which in an amount of approximately $875,000. We're currently doing the preliminary studies right now. We're trying to identify which mature trees will stay and which mature trees will go. But we're scheduled to, our preliminary schedule is to go to council for advertisement of the project in November 2008, beginning the construction in March 2009. So this will be beyond our Southern California rainy season, so that the project progresses, the construction of the project progresses smoothly, and there's no delays due to the weather. That's all I have.
Any questions?
Yeah, go ahead, Evan. Okay, I have a few questions. What happened, this is phase 2, and I know that we funded you for the current fiscal year. Is that in the same location? Are those funds being used in the same location or a different location?
It's in an adjacent location. That particular funds are being used, and we call that phase 1.
Right.
We call that West Glendale ADA curb ramp and sidewalk installation project phase 1. It's currently 70% design completed, so we'll be finished in a couple of months. And it's bounded. It's this side of the drawing here, east of this project. The project is bounded by Allen Avenue on the north, Victory Boulevard on the west, Western on the south, and the Freeway I-5 at the east.
Now, in terms of, you said that the population served was 370?
That's correct.
Now, when you say population served, is that disabled persons, 370 disabled persons that it's serving, or the total area population is 370?
That's total area population.
How many, do you have any idea how many people would actually be using because it's ADA compliant sidewalks and curb ramps, we're assuming that it's for, maybe people with strollers or more importantly, people who are disabled. Do you know how many people in this project area are disabled?
No, we did not research that information.
Okay.
But usually our projects, we plan for use of any disabled person. So
Sure.
like when we engineer it, we make sure that all our projects are constructed in conformance with the ADA rules and
Sure.
requirements.
Are these, I'm sorry, I have a few questions. Are these streets normally used for, by the public to get from one place to another, or are they mostly private residential roads?
These are just for local access. Basically the arterial or collector road would be Flower Street, but it's not there. It's not part of this project. If there are any sidewalks that are kind of uplifted or damaged, they're close by, we repair those too.
I have a couple more questions, and then I'll let my fellow commissioners ask theirs. This project only installs new curb ramps, or does it install totally new sidewalks as well?
It does, yes. It also does install new sidewalks. There's some majority of the streets here in the dark area it either have half of the street have sidewalks or both sides of the streets do not have sidewalks.
I actually want to follow up on that because some of the photographs that you showed us clearly show that. My question to you, what's the life expectancy of a sidewalk, of a ramp?
Usually concrete lasts for like 40 years if there's no
No people
outside-
walking on it?
No.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
With no outside external forces like trees or too much heavy vehicles driving on it. Sometimes even the driveways are supposed to last like 40 years. But so that's the life expectancy of
And that leads me to the next question. We've heard in the past in the city where somebody from the city goes in and takes down a tree, and people complain about the tree as the tree has been there, whatever, 60, 80, 100 years, and you replace it with a new tree, which is obviously a lot smaller. How do you handle that with the public? Do they get input before you go in?
Generally we would. If there's going to be a substantial number of trees that are going to be removed or affected by the project, we would hold a community meeting, and we would also include in the community meeting our urban forester, which they will identify which trees are mature, which trees are a safety hazard. So we'll point that out all to the public, explaining to them why we retain a certain tree, why we remove a certain tree. Obviously, for safety reasons, we have to remove trees. There are also some other reasons wherein if we cannot construct the sidewalk in a safe manner, then some of the trees may have to be removed also. We usually look for initial ways to construct the sidewalk without removing the tree, but sometimes ultimately a tree has to be removed for safety purposes.
Okay. And then, I know that from looking at the map, I'm very familiar with the area. A lot of those are single-family residential areas. And that particular area, especially near Disney, is that a CDBG eligible
That
area?
was my next question.
I am not sure that that's the case.
There are parts of that area that aren't CDBG eligible. I'd have to look at the map again just to correlate the actual streets. I know we've done some work on Cosmic Way, which requires some street lights because it was an area that was really in need of lights. So we have done CDBG projects there in the past. But with ADA improvements, there is no low mod requirement per se. If it's serving handicapped persons, then again, presumed to be low and moderate income. So one of the requirements, again, we look at is it an ADA type project, and it is eligible, regardless whether it's in the target area. But we do look at, again, correlating the targeted area.
I guess I would ask that, and I'm not questioning the validity of your presentation by any means, that maybe at the next meeting that we have, if we could just do a little recap as to the areas that are CDBG eligible, just to make sure that, that we are following the right path, if you will.
Absolutely, yes.
And the question that I would have, given what you stated, Mr. Creo, is wouldn't then it be necessary to demonstrate that this project would actually be used by disabled persons if it's under the heading of ADA? If this is not if portions of this are not a CDBG census tract, my understanding is there needs to be demonstrated that even if it is not in a CDBG census tract, that CDBG eligible participants would be using. Mr. Yang, go ahead.
Handicapped improvements, CDBG funds could be used for handicapped improvements anywhere in the city of Glendale. It does not have to be linked directly to low-income benefit or numbers of persons concentrated in an area that are handicapped. That's a HUD general guideline. Handicapped, elderly, and homeless are all presumed to be to meet the low-income test.
I have a question. This regarding, I guess, the scope of work. When you place a new sidewalk on the streets, do you also install storm drains and other, facilities along with the, installation of sidewalk, or just a sidewalk?
In general, we would look at the possibility of the need for a storm drain. But in this particular case, we're installing sidewalk, and with the general area, with our initial project review, there is no storm drain needed for this project.
I see. What about, you're doing the application of a slurry coat, that's more considered as a cosmetic type of work, for the road. Is this because of when you're installing the sidewalk, because you're digging out, out of the street and so on, so as you're repairing, you're just doing the top coat on it? Is that why you're doing the slurry coats?
Yeah, the slurry coat also is even though it is just it's like an 1/8 of an inch thick. It's really not a structural rehabilitation type. But if you use the slurry coating in a timely manner, wherein the existing streets right now are a prime candidate for slurry sealing. If it's cracked or there are a lot of potholes and there are a lot of street damages, then slurry coating would not be the application to rehabilitate the street.
So actually, your scope of work is not just a sidewalk installation, but you're actually rehabbing the road as well.
That's correct. Based on our experience with the neighborhoods, every time we Public Works Engineering constructs a project within a certain neighborhood, they ask how come you didn't improve the streets? Also, you're already there. So to minimize the impact to the public and to the neighborhood there, we try to do all the appropriate engineering applications to the neighborhood, so which includes resurfacing the street by slurry seal.
Okay. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
I just wanted to say thank you again to the city and all of the city departments and the city council for allowing us to hear some of these presentations, because they were quite eye-opening and informative.
I agree. We'll take a 50-minute recess. Welcome back. Can we have a conversion of a warehouse to athletic and cultural facility by Hometemen Ara chapter?
That was pretty good. Thank you.
Good morning, gentlemen. My name is Armand Gorgorian, Executive Director at Hometemen Glendale chapter, and I have with me today Mr. Vigan Davitian. He is a past chairman of our organization, and also right now he is the head of our planning committee for this specific project. Should I answer any questions, or you want me to give you a summary of the project?
Overview of the project. The overview of the project.
The overview of the project, Mr. Davitian will give you the presentation, but the thing is that we've been looking for this center for the last 2 years. The main objective was to have something in City of Glendale, because we originated in Glendale in 1978, and because we needed a larger space, couldn't find anything at that time, we were forced to go the other side of the border in the City of Los Angeles, still serving the Glendale community. But we wanted to have a footnote in City of Glendale because we are the Glendale chapter. Finally, we were able to find this location, which is not only it's in City of Glendale, also it's very close to our existing center, and that will make life much easier once it becomes operational. I would like to ask Mr. Davitian to come here and give the presentation. And then later on, if you have any questions, both of us will be available to answer.
Thank you, Arnold. Members of the committee, it's a pleasure to be here this morning. My name is Vigan Davitian. As Mr. Gorgorian mentioned, I've been working with the organization for many years, and currently I'm the chairman of our committee that's in charge of the planning and implementation of the new project. We have a short presentation for you. I'll run through it very quickly. We wanted to highlight Glendale, as Mr. Gorgorian pointed out, is we are elated that we, after about 5 years of search, we finally found something very appropriate and good in the city of Glendale, just about 3 to 4 blocks from our property, within walking distance. Why did we need a second center? These are some of the points. I don't expect you to see all of it, but basically we've been operational for about 11 years almost now, and our membership has grown, and our activities really have surpassed our capacity at this point. And our membership drive to serve the community is being suppressed really because of our inability to expand our programs in our current center. The current center has some facilities that are being sort of abused because of the fact that they really are not for certain uses, and we need some additional space to serve the youth that actually also don't have a place in our center, and we have to rent facilities outside. So some of our members really don't get a chance to see our center and our programs up front. So really that was the driving force behind finding a new center. If I can direct you to the map, the one down at the bottom of the star is our current Arat Center. You can see the red dotted line is really the city boundary between Glendale and the city of Los Angeles. We are about 3 to 4 blocks just between Dolores and Roslyn inside Glendale, and that's our new center. The property is almost 51,000 square feet. We have about a 24,000 square foot lot. And the property is, as you can see, highlighted here with the yellow boundary, and the frontage as well as the parking in the back. We have a current structure that's basically a tilt-up warehouse structure, and the funds are being requested for renovation of that property and structure. We have developed a master plan. These are our guidelines. We wanted to make sure that our membership is served properly, our parking needs are adequate, and also the members have a flexible place that they can conduct their activities. As you can see, many of our activities are multifaceted, from cultural activities to sports of all kinds, from ping pong to martial arts to basketball, which seems to be everybody's favorite these days. We have developed a complete master planning process comprised of immediate, short-term, and long-term. Our immediate and short-term projects are really what we're requesting the funds for. We hope to complete our short-term process within the next 3 to 6 years. So really what we're asking you is not what we have expected for the entire project to really cost, but we're asking you for a portion of that immediate and short-range project. This is our floor plan. Sections A and B really are within the warehouse area and where the most of the funds will be spent. We have carefully thought out the square footages, the uses, and expected costs. And as you can see, we have developed a cost estimate for each of our phases, and pretty much our immediate and short-term conservative approach is costing out to be, oops, I think, actually, if we can go to edit mode. I think I copied the slide for my last slide and made it, yeah, this is our proposed thing, but I copied a hidden slide, so the slide was actually hidden. This is what we're... I'm
sorry.
Oops. If you can just go to the last slide on the presentation.
Just click on slide shows and current slide and
The last slide will not show because it's a hidden slide that I copied inadvertently. So if we can just look at this, for example, we have about 15 to 16 different items that we're requesting funding for, including repairing of the roof, which actually, interestingly enough, is leaking right now because of the rainy weather that we had. Installation of the courts that would serve our athletics and youth activities, the air conditioning, sprinkler system, the relocation of electrical panel, construction of new restrooms to meet the code, installation of the roof, and we have 2 loading docks, one inside and one outside, that we're intending to fill so we can have more space and more parking. The fence around the property, the resurfacing of the parking lot to make the circulation work better, and so on and so forth. As you can see, as part of this, the total comes out to about $404,000, from which we are committing to raise just under $60,000, and we're coming to you with a funding request of about $345,000 in this allotment.
Okay, thank you. Any questions?
Armand and myself would be happy to answer any questions.
Yeah.
I have a couple of questions. Thank you for coming out and making this presentation, and thank you for the service that you do provide to the community. A couple of questions here. First question, if you were to get the funding that you're requesting, $345,000, what would be the completion date of the project? Estimated, of course. We understand construction
We
is
have a
variable.
timetable of 28 weeks, but then 28 weeks will not start as of July 1st, because if we are approved for the funding, and then we have to go through the process of having a signed contract with City of Glendale, and then when we do the signing, then we start the bidding process. When the day we start construction, we have a timetable of 28 weeks.
So what time frame do you think it would take to actually start the construction, assuming that you receive funding?
50% is us, 50% is the city. Usually in the past history that we've had, it takes probably July, August, probably end of August, we get the signed contract.
So 6 months from that date, then?
Yes.
So it would be, worst case scenario, then you're saying if you receive the funding, it would be done by, what, the beginning of the third quarter of 2009?
Beginning of third quarter of 2009 will be done, finished, yes. The thing is that we, you
2009 or
understand.
2008?
2009. With this 08, 09, they'll receive their funding.
09
Yeah.
year with the
Because
calendar.
we work with the City of Glendale. In the past, we worked with Mr. Carrillo. Every bidding that we do, a certain amount, if it's more than a certain amount, we have to have 3 bids, and it is being approved by City of Glendale which bid to take. We open them up in their presence, and at that time, together we decide the lowest bid, and that job goes to that bidder.
And also, I think, as we have pointed out in the application, we are intending to do the project management in-house with our volunteer efforts. So we would be estimating to save about 20% if we do that. And we have that experience in the past projects.
Allow me to add, when we say volunteer, it's not volunteers like me. We have a developer, a person that does construction for his livelihood, and that's the person that does that. He's the same person that oversaw the previous project that we had, that we were funded by CDBG.
Now, one more question on my part. You had a conservative versus aggressive, funding plan. The conservative being what we're seeing today for the $300,000 to $400,000, and then the aggressive, which I believe stated somewhere around $1 to $2 million. Now, obviously there isn't the money to fund the $1 to $2 million, but is the conservative plan a stepping stone to the aggressive plan, or is it replaceable? What I'm trying to ask here is, if we're funding a conservative plan that cuts out some improvements that you're going to make to the building, is it then going to cost more for you to implement your long-term aggressive plan, or do they build upon each other?
Mr. Marion, that will be an additional cost. It will not replace this one. Let me give you just one example. Because of the warehouse that we're talking about that we want to convert to a basketball court and other athletic activities, that height is about 21 feet, which is not high enough for 18 to 20-year-old basketball players to play there. So we have decided that right now that center is going to serve kids 7 to 12, 7 to 13-year-olds. When we have the funding, the first thing will be to raise the roof, take the roof off and put a new roof. Everything that has been done underneath the roof will not change. We will not duplicate those costs. It will be an additional cost. There's another 2,500 square feet of large space in the office areas that we showed in the 6,500 square foot. That is something that can become a very good space for different kinds of activities. That is also a secondary and the part of the project that we call aggressive.
Also, inside the warehouse area to the south, I believe, we sort of diagonal, so we always had debates whether it's south or east or west. But on the south side of it, we have an area that we really, right now, are calling it kind of multi-sport area. So, in the aggressive plan, we may want to think about, doing something more, kids out there in that area, which, really wouldn't change anything that we do as part of this grant application. So in other words, any of the funding here really is not going to go to waste.
Do you have any indication as to number of kids that you will start serving with these expanded facilities?
We anticipate that once we're done this portion of the project, we will have 250 kids per day served over there.
Wow.
Total will be not immediately. Immediately right now, we open the door, we will have 300 additional kids that we serve. But in a period of maybe 8 to 12 months, it will go up to 800 kids, additional 800 kids for that project.
So these are kids that you're not serving?
We are not serving right now.
We've traditionally had very long waiting lists, and, the reason that we weren't able to accommodate them really isn't because we don't want to. We do want to, and, obviously, there's a need for more staff and more volunteers when we bring them on. But a big part of that reason is that the facilities are not there. I mean, if you come to the current center right now, you can see that round the clock there's scheduling of activities. Sometimes, there's like 3 teams that are practicing on the same court at the same time. So, that really is to kind of relieve the logjam that we have in the current center. And as I said, fortunately, we were able to find something that's within walking distance, which helps us in really lowering our overhead costs, because we don't have to, hire as many people. If we, for example, if the property was, another 3 miles north of Glendale, then we would definitely have to hire more people. But this way, we could control the costs of overhead. Have the use that's within reasonable walking distance.
So if you had the financial resources, to go past the immediate first, you could actually take on bigger undertakings and actually take care of more kids?
Definitely.
Now, the demand is always there. We have the summer basketball programs that have been very helpful in supporting us.
Thank you. A couple of questions. I'm glad to see you guys back in Glendale, because I was
Yeah,
in the committee
we are
when you
too.
guys had to step out of Glendale. And
I mean, that was the cardinal rule. I mean, in our search committee, that was the unchangeable.
Yeah. So anyway, having said that, a couple of questions. I get the feeling from going through the application that you are waiting to secure funding before really proceeding with the project in terms of all its planning phases, all its pre-development. Am I correct in that?
The question was raised that have we been to cities of Glendale or Los Angeles for preliminary things? One thing is clear that we do not require a lot of architectural plans for this because we're not doing any construction, it's just rehabilitation. So the main thing was to be able to get the permits, the CUP if it was necessary. Preliminary the investigations that we did, in the past there was a law that if a property was in two jurisdictions, one jurisdiction could take over the other, and with understanding between the two of them, and one jurisdiction would have done that. When we submitted this proposal to you, we were in the process of looking into that. If we can have Glendale take over Los Angeles, or Los Angeles will take over Glendale, to get all the permits from one jurisdiction. And that is what I mentioned there in my response to the weakness and strength of the program that the department gave me. At this point, we have come to the conclusion that the Los Angeles is going to do Los Angeles and Glendale is going to do Glendale. And I was also informed that because the funding comes from CDBG, City of Glendale, we have to have a final clearance from City of Glendale. I have had discussions with the planning division in City of Glendale already, and we are already in the process of getting permits from City of Los Angeles. So that was then when we submitted. There has been a lot of development since then.
Okay. What would the CUP be for?
From my point of view, the portion that is in City of Glendale, we don't need any CUP because everything was office area and it's still going to be used as an office area. The CUP will be in the other portion where you are changing the use from warehouse to gymnasium.
Yeah, basically, it's more of a preteen activity center, gymnasium for practices only, really not for any kind of large-scale athletic activities that would require years or.
Do you have an estimate of, since that is the City of LA process, how long that might take? Is that likely to take longer than reaching an agreement with the City of Glendale should you be funded?
Based on our conversation with an architectural firm that is following up this process, he is hoping that it will be over the counter. It will be a very fast process in City of Los Angeles, because we have the parking, and in the past, the same organization has had experience with City of Los Angeles in getting CUPs over there for the existing center, so we don't see any problems there.
And no major structural changes are.
I mean, to me, it looks like it should be a slam dunk.
Right.
Really,
That's what we were told.
On here, you say, to keep the cost to a minimum as in the past projects, we have decided to manage the project by our professional volunteers, which you stated. My question to you is, when you say manage the project, does that mean you're going to do an owner-builder project? You're going to subcontract it out yourself, or you are going to hire a general contractor?
We're not going to have a general contractor.
So you're going to do all the subcontracts yourself?
Every line of construction that is over 5,000, I believe, 3,000 or 5,000, that the cost is that much, we have to go to bid. We, as the owners of the building, along with the staff from CDBG, we go over the bids, we decide them, and we give the subcontract to them. On our planning committee, we have Mr. Victor Martin, that they know him and they have the experience with him, working with him. He's a developer. He's in this line of business. He's the person that will oversee everything from our point.
Okay. And I just wanted to make sure that that is a process that is acceptable with the CDBG process.
Right, yeah.
Thanks for that.
Mr. Olivares, yes, we have done this similar type of processes of the owner subbing out and bidding out its own subcontractors. Again, we've worked with Home and Edmond, and it is up to them to go out. In this case, it would be about 10 subcontractors, and to go out to bid on each one of those. So it really is incumbent upon them trying to be as efficient as possible, since one sub will be bidded out maybe at a different time.
Okay, and the reason I'm asking that is because I know that one of the requirements is for the nonprofits or the project to have a budget submitted by a licensed contractor, architect. I have the feeling, and correct me if I'm wrong, that this budget was prepared by your staff, who I'm sure are professionals or not.
No. The proposal that we submitted, we have a budget proposal for each line item by a contractor. Based on those, I have.
And I saw those. I saw those. My question is a technical question. I'm not questioning what you submitted, but if the language here says that it should be submitted by a licensed general contractor or architect, and it was submitted by the organization, I'm not questioning the bids by any means. Is that okay?
For purposes of the funding application, that would be okay.
Okay.
Along the same line, where he might have a concern, and that's the same question actually I had with them, is when they mentioned that they're be saving 20% on their project management costs, is that one of the reasons why you hire general contractors, because they, have the liability insurance, the bond issues and all that, that we can actually, have those qualified contractors, be, I guess, accountable for the project. When we have a owner-developer project like this, how efficient is our monitoring, and how, when something goes wrong, who is accountable, and how can we, implement our policies on a builder type of situation like this?
Yes, Chairman Lee, members of the CDBG Advisory Committee, it's more complicated all around to undergo a construction project as an owner-builder. Our preference as grant administrators is for one general contractor to be responsible for all of the subcontractors and all the trades, and to be accountable for the work and any issues that come up, and change orders and progress payments and stuff. So what we do on a case-by-case basis, we will try to work with the agencies, provided that they can demonstrate that they have the qualifications and experience doing their own contracting, as in the case of Home and Edmond and a few others that in the past, then we would be willing to allow them to do their own construction management, and to break up the project into the major sub-trades, and then comply with all the federal rules and regulations for all the sub-trades, which means open competitive bidding and all of the EEO requirements. So it's more complicated, and sometimes it takes longer, but we're willing to do it.
Any issue with the liability issues?
Well, each subrecipient does submit a certificate of general liability as part of the agreement that they sign with the City of Glendale. And then all the subcontractors have to be licensed subcontractors. We have to submit their names to HUD to make sure that they're not debarred contractors or don't have any outstanding issues on file. In terms of bonds or insurance certificates from the subs,
The liability, of course, they have to be workers' comp. Certainly, we check their license from the California State Contractors Licensing Board, insurance, all the requirements if it was a bigger contractor for each individual subcontractor, again, which really just lengthens some time for them to get certified and approved. But we do have those assurances that there are contractors have their insurance and everything else.
Commissioner Smith.
There's a couple of things. One is I want to thank the city for being so accommodating and working with the centers as they come with similar situations. Second is I want to point out that I guess there are a lot of savings as you don't pay for a project management or construction management fees or a general contractor's fee. So it becomes another example of an organization trying to do the best they can, getting the most out of the buckets, if you will. Can you give us any indication as to what would have been the additional funds that would have been required if you wanted to have a general contractor, construction management fee, project management fee, and other similar fees added?
Well, Mr. Bagdasarian, I don't know the line of business that Mr. Amirian and Mr. Lee does, but Mr. Olivares, I know he is in this business. The 20% that we indicated there, it wasn't a number that I came up with. I checked with a couple of contractors. When we go to a general contractor, that'll cost us additional 20%. If we're talking about a $400,000 project, that will become a $500,000, $500,000. We, at this point, we just cannot afford it. If you recall, our motto is to do most of the things that we do on a volunteer basis. We are able to run this organization with 4.5, 5 full-time employees because we have 300 volunteers that work for our organization. This is another sample of that. Yes, Mr. Carrillo is absolutely right. It makes the work much more difficult, but the difficulty is all ours. We take it upon ourselves to go through this just to save money. We cannot come to you and ask for $500,000 because we know you can't do that. So we're doing the savings some other places.
Now, probably $80,000 to $100,000 would have been.
Right. I mean, it's very commendable what you're doing, and the only, I guess, the concern that I might have is that, general contractors are there because they're professionals. That's why they charge for their services. And my concern is that, you might have some track records in the past, but you are not by trade general contractor. So you are not professionals in this field. So that's where my concern comes in. How effective are you? How good are you really managing these projects? When things go well, then it's fine. But I think in the construction field, the Murphy's Law always, they come and, camp out at your project. So, when I look at those, possibilities, then, how well can you adapt to that type of situation, not being the professional as you are? And that's my concern.
Mr. Lee, if I may, every step the way that we go forward, we work with City of Glendale CDBG, the Community Development Department, their staff. Every one of those subcontractors are being checked by them to make sure that they are licensed. They provide their own insurances, their own workman's compensation, in addition to what we provide as an organization. Up to this point, we've had 3 projects that we have worked with the Community Development Department, and all 3 of them we've done on a volunteer basis. Yes, sometimes it has been lengthier, not always our fault, but the contractor's fault. But we have done all of them in a timely manner and within the budget. So the history says that we are able to do that.
And given that, excuse me, Al, given that in the estimation of the staff, given that you have worked with this community organization in the past, is this organization does it have the ability to handle this type of undertaking, given the past information he's talking about?
Yes, given past history with the agency and past work with several of their project managers, we have not had any difficulties with their project management and their expertise. They do have engineers, contractors, much more experience than certainly we have to manage a project. And again, it's all we're doing is eliminating a general contractor with overhead charges and who's going to manage anyway. So we've had a good relationship with Home and Edmond in the past years to implement all the projects. And like Mr. Gregorian said, we have always been under budget or right at budget to finish these projects.
If I may add to that a little bit.
So I guess the question becomes, are you lacking a general contractor, or you have a general contractor that works as a volunteer and is not charging
We
you?
cannot call that person a general contractor because he is
not signing a contract.
Those people are not his subcontractors, but he is acting as a general contractor, dealing with each subcontractor, going over their contracts and making sure that they're doing their job on a timely manner and within the budget.
On your behalf?
He is
right.
actually a member of our Planning and Implementation Committee,
I
which
see.
is comprised of 6 individuals who are all professionals, including myself. I'm a registered engineer. And we have weekly meetings, and the person who will be overseeing the contracts also is, they're on site very frequently, and, we have the track record of working with him in the past, and we also have legal advice when we need it from the membership.
You mentioned of your track records. Do you know what the size of your past projects were?
Yes. We had a project worth $350,000. Out of that $350,000, we were able to secure funds from CDBG in the amount of $241,500. We had another project that the cost of the project was about $200,000+. We secured a CDBG fund in the amount of $125,000. And the recent one that is giving us the biggest headache, and we're working with only one contractor, it's an elevator contractor. It's a $50,000 budget.
Okay, thank you.
If I may add to that, we've had a long history with Home and Edmond, and my reason for my asking the question was to make sure that we were still within the guidelines of what's required. But historically, I can never remember any issue with any of their construction projects. They always got built on time, and so I think it's a good program.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
And I appreciate you mentioning that you can't recall any issues that we've had with Home and Edmond, because we keep those issues between at the staff level, and we take time and energy to work those through. And the reason I say that is because, in all honesty, the biggest challenge is in complying with trying to get 3 bids for every subtrade. And I think with Home and Edmond on the previous projects and with other organizations, that's been the biggest challenge for those organizations to do their own construction management. And with the licensed general contractor, it's easier because they don't have to go out and get 3 bids. We have to get 3 bids from the general licensed contractor, and then they have their own teams of subcontractors that they bring into the project. So it's easier working it that way, and it's a lot more challenging when you're having to go out to do open competitive bids 10 times for 10 different trades, then trying to coordinate them, and yeah, you pay a general that 20% overhead and profit to take that on so that you can focus on serving the community with your programs. So it's a challenge, it's a trade-off. If the organization is willing to take it on in order to save some funds for the more critical needs, and again, they can demonstrate that they have capacity, they have experience, they have a history, they have a board of directors that is committed, then we're willing to work with them. But we always prefer to go with a licensed general contractor if we could.
How do you handle change orders and the unforeseen things? I know you have a contingency in there.
Yes, we have.
That's about 10%, but yeah.
We have done that. We have the change orders in the safety and security measures project. Quite a few of them we handled it.
So that falls on your lap. Okay. All right. I think, we spent quite a time on this project.
No complaints on our part.
We appreciate you.
Yeah, we wanted to be educated. We want to be sure before we make the decision. We want to make the right decision.
You have our assurance that the project is overseen by both professional and volunteer people that really do it from their hearts. So.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have Armenian Cultural Foundation Youth Community Center.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Could you please come up?
Good morning. Nice to be back in front of you. I think it would be remiss if I didn't start off by doing 2 things. One, we have to thank your staff. Jess, Moises, Mara. They've babysat us through these different difficulties that we've had and working them out. And instead of us getting very aggravated and them getting very aggravated, we've worked as a team to see this project to where we're at today. And I also wanted to thank the board itself for going to bat for us last year in front of the city council. I know we didn't get the $100,000 that we tried, but we were pleased to see that the board was unanimous in supporting the youth center and seeing the validity of the need in that community. And so with great pleasure, I'd like to tell you also that we have Pacific Western Bank granting us our loans. It's been presented to the board, to the staff. February 12th, the bulldozers will be on property. We will start construction on the 12th. And so we're very excited. And so after all of this difficulty, not always yours or not always ours, sometimes just the city and the rigmarole and the contractors and getting the bids. It was a new experience seeing how difficult and how detailed some of these things were. And it's sad that it has taken this amount of time. But again, the final product, I think, is better overall because of all of our efforts. And so we'd like to say thank you. Just wish that the permitting and city procedures, not your committee, but the city, sometimes is so delayed. Just getting responses, it becomes frustrating. And that's secondary. I'm not going to complain about the city because the city is where we're asking the funding from. And so that wouldn't be a very smart approach.
Let's start over again.
Yeah, let's start over again. I really love it. As you know, I'm not going to go into selling the project again. You have already accepted the basic premise of it. I think it's important to remember where we're located is an area of need. It's underserved. It is a low and moderate income area. It has over 18,000 youth in our service area under the age of 18. It is a high crime area in the city. We have issues in that area on drugs, gangs, etc. Some of the programs that we're going to be taking care of inside our facility once completed will be anti-drug programs, anti-gang programs. We'll have family counseling provided by the ARS and their counseling centers. It's going to be more than a recreation area. It's going to be more than the gymnasium that we're going to have there. These offices are going to supply a service to the city and the community that's needed there. English as a second language will be offered. These things become vital because there's so many immigrants, be they Hispanic, Latino, Armenian, Iraqi, whatever. The Korean community needs it. We have the facility, thank God, through the ARS, of having translators and people who are able to present these programs that from an organization that has proceeded to do this in a variety of locations around Los Angeles. The other organizations that are involved there, the Armenian Youth Federation, tries to activate. And, for example, one of the things I just noticed, I got a call at home last night about getting out to vote, how important it is to get out to vote. And they identified themselves as the Armenian Youth Federation, that they think that it's absolutely vital to vote in the primaries. Now, there's not an Armenian candidate. There's nothing going on that's Armenian in this election. But the idea of them working the community to teach them about democracy and being involved, joining any campaign and getting people out. I think these are services that are the hidden value that this community center, this youth center, will be giving. And so we're really pleased. We're proud of where we're at. We climbed a lot of mountains together, all of us, and we're ready to roll. And I'm here to answer any questions. Now, you know we're asking the money for the elevator, for handicapped and elderly access, since we're going to be having senior programs there, especially during the day. We need that facility. By not getting the funding last year, which would have covered the cost of that elevator, it kind of hurt us, and that's why we're here today to not overburden the committee, because we know that you have limited funds, but with the delay, the inflation costs that have gone into this now, the difficulty in getting funding, the delays have put dampers on some of our fundraising activities, because we fully thought that we were going to be going last year. With the delaying in some of the permitting and things like this, you delayed the fundraising, though we do have, as you know, in my reports to you, like $800,000 that we have raised for this facility with the land paid for already. So with that thumbnail, I open it up to whatever questions you may have.
You actually answered a lot of my questions, because I recall last year you saying you were ready for permits, and that was one of the big circles in my proposal. But I have one basic concern, and I don't know if it's missing here or maybe we didn't receive it. $110,000 for a two-story elevator appears very expensive to me. But I didn't see any sub-bid here, and that would be my only concern.
Through our general contractor, we asked, to get us an estimate of what it would be, and I guess he had 2 or 3 estimates. One was 140, one was 130, and one was 110. And so we put the estimate at 110, hopefully taking the lowest bid and going forward with that. We did not include those. The general has those documents.
Okay. I think it's important information for us to look at, just to verify what you're requesting.
Sure.
I'm glad to see you back. I mean, I think your building is going to be a beautiful building. I really do. Can't wait to see it finished. And anyway, that was my only question.
So, assuming that you get full funding, what's the worst-case scenario for the completion date?
Worst case, they said within a year. We're hoping 9 months that it would be done.
So
if it starts February 12th, by the end of the year, we have every expectation that it'll be done. Worst case would be February of next year, that it would be open and operating.
And you stated that you had a loan covering the full amount of the project cost?
We have $1.8 million available to us through Pacific Western Bank with signed documents that have been turned into the CDBG.
I would just echo the statement by Mr. Olivares. It would be good if we had some details exactly, what that $110,000 is going towards, and I'm sure that you can provide that fairly easily. But I appreciate you coming out here and speaking with us. Thank you.
Actually, I'd like to add, if it's possible, and I know it's a time concern, if you could get it to us before our deliberations, I think it would be great for us to look at that. I'm just throwing that out there.
I don't know if I can.
I understand.
Because from here, I have 2 meetings from here. I can make a couple calls and see if I can get it from the
that's what I'm
general.
suggesting. Have your general fax them over here. I just think it's really important that we see that as part of our deliberations.
I'll make every effort to do that. I can't promise because
Absolutely.
You're going to deliberate within the next hour or 2.
Understand.
And I'm here. Any other questions?
Does the city have some guidelines or low and high numbers for similar type things?
Well, Chairman Lee and members of the committee, I was going to suggest we could always use our fax number. If the general has that information available, he could fax it to our office, and maybe we can get it here on time. And just for clarification, Commissioner Olivares, what you're requesting is a detailed itemization of the elevator work?
Yeah, I mean, they're requesting $110,000 to pay for the elevator.
Okay.
I'd like to see a cost.
It's a very
from a
good point.
subcontractor for elevator.
It's a very good point. Going back to the concern that the chairman had about the pool and so many $1 million for an, open pool, it just makes you wonder about if there's checks and balance. I'm assuming there are, and you've been doing this.
I guess question might be is that just the elevator, or is there structural work,
Structural work, I guess I'm not a
Right.
construction guy.
Right.
But I know the concrete work has to be laid through, and then all the elevator project, because none of that is in. So
And that's
it would
exactly
be
what-
from scratch. I'm assuming that's
Well,
why it
that's
would
exactly
be.
where I'm going with this, because to get to that level of detail, when you purchase an elevator should be $60,000, $70,000.
Right.
Now, if they're including the power behind it, and if they're including the alarm, I don't know what else they might be including.
It's everything to do with the elevator. That much I know. I told him, how
understand.
much does it cost, so I'm able to answer a question. And as a matter of fact, when I spoke with Moises
And that's
before,
exactly my point. It's not clear exactly what's
Right.
included.
Right. That's what we want to
wrote
see.
a little bit more, maybe.
Yeah, if there's more money allotted for structural work, then, it could be that your facility might need more, structural work. So that's, I guess, the part that we are a little bit,
Yeah, the structural work is
We wanna
involved.
see.
If I'm not mistaken, in the construction timeline, the early part of it is the construction and concrete for the elevator is listed in that bar graph. You look on the elevator.
Yeah, all your trade items are there. But
So-
again, I go back to the 110 and going, okay, what exactly is the 110 paying for? And it's not clear to me on the proposal.
I'll do my best to get something to you.
okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Of the last people here, Center for Mission and Community Development from Glendale Adventist Medical Center.
Did you say we're the last?
Yes.
But not the least.
I'm going to begin simply by making some introductory comments about the project. My name's Bruce Nelson, and I'm the Director of Community Services at Glendale Adventist. With me is Dan Brown. He's the Director of Construction at Glendale Adventist. And together, we're going to try to address this, answer your questions, and also speak to the role that this facility can play in the community. If we were to count the number of gymnasiums that are available in the Glendale community, outside of those that are dedicated to schools, we could count those on one hand. This is a unique facility. It dates back to 1926. That's part of the problem. And we inherited it at Glendale Adventist Medical Center. It's never been a part of the medical facilities. As we inherited, it went through a lot of different purposes over the years and then ultimately became a storage facility. About 20 years ago, we decided to pull that out of just being a storage facility because it is 15,000 square feet, and the insured value of it's over $5 million. So we pulled it out of being a storage facility and turned it into a community services center. The last 20 years, it has represented an emerging or growing presence as a community service center, and the hospital is essentially willing to contribute this facility, with its value to the community on an ongoing basis indefinitely. You notice that when we did this last construction project, we did it on the other side of the hospital. So this really isn't in any future construction plans way for the hospital, and we expect to keep it here as a community services facility. Having said that, the hospital also funds the costs of community outreach programs, including our staff and our materials and supplies and other expenses that are associated with those outreach programs. Sometimes we go out and get grants to support these things. We've been rather successful, bringing in about $10 million in grants over the last few years to support this community outreach activity. However, the hospital has a core responsibility that is related to health care. That's really the core business and the core purpose of being in the hospital. Each year, the hospital has millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars worth of requests for capital equipment submitted by different departments. The requests are always at least 100% greater than what we can fund internally. And yet, nonetheless, we still manage to have the very latest, best equipment, sometimes not only regionally, but in the nation. So there's a very concerted effort to direct limited resources into the primary service that the hospital is obligated to provide to this community. And that's really what you want the hospital to be doing. That's providing the best health care for you and your families. But it also means that we have to come to you as partners in making the community services facility that this building represents as an opportunity accessible and available. Over the last 20 years, and actually since 1926, there's obviously been need for maintenance and upkeep. and that those maintenance and upkeep needs have continued to increase and haven't necessarily been addressed. So you'll see in here that while this is one application, it's a part of a larger intention that we have of really creating a facility that can, for the long term, sustain substantial community outreach and community services to Glendale. And obviously, we're not necessarily in the poorest portion of the community, but on the other hand, the outreach from that facility has the opportunity to reach out throughout all of Glendale, and has in fact reached throughout all of Glendale and serving populations. We're not only limited to children and to young people, although there are a number of churches that use the facility precisely for that reason. But nonetheless, there's a lot of other activities that go on promoting health in our community as well. Well, having said that, Dan is going to talk about our recent history and the state of the project as it is now.
Morning, gentlemen. As you're aware, we were given a grant a couple years ago to start the project. We received $150,000. We stood in front of you about a year ago or so, requested an extension till the end of June of this year. We're on track to be completed with that first phase. Initially, we requested $150,000 to put sprinklers in the building. The bids came back way over that, as you probably remember. And so we've been working with the city to just change it to just the first floor. And our architect is meeting with Jeffrey Halpert this week to get the final stamps from the city so we can move ahead with bids. And I turned in a schedule to Moises' staff today that shows that we'll be going to public bid in this month, get bids back in March, have the contractor chosen in March, and have contracts signed and get the work all done by, our intention is May, which gives us another month of flexible time, because our deadline is June 30. So
extension runs out. So what we really like to do then is just keep the process going, because as Dan comments, we already have approval, or excuse me, we already have the plans and the estimates for the entire building, even though the funding that we had originally was enough to do half of the building, well, not exactly half, but the lower portion of the building. We have the plans, and all of the architectural drawings and everything else is done for the entire building.
right. So the timeline on the second phase, will be much shorter than the first. We already have the plans and specs ready, so if we do get the funding for the additional 200 and something thousand we're asking for, we can go ahead with the public bidding on that portion. We already have the plans. We'll be able to just continue going and finish the second floor and the attic space and be done with the fire life safety for this entire building. In a short manner, actually. We're putting a time of, say, 6 months. We'd only need about 6 months to be totally done upon approval from your department.
What happens if you only get partial funding?
We'll figure out a way of doing a portion of it.
Yeah, we've got approval from the city to split it into two phases, the bottom floor and the top floor. If we receive partial, we'll have to rethink of that. Maybe we can do just the attic space or something.
It depends on how partial.
Yeah. I know we all know there's limited funds, so depending on how much we can get.
I'd rather do the gymnasium and then leave the attic space for later.
Right.
You think that the fire department's going to allow you to do that?
Well, if we can show that we'll come again next year, request funding for the final phase, something like that. We know that money is probably going to be available again next year, although that's probably never a given. But that would be our intent, probably, to keep on going. We could also try to get some additional funding from our administration out of capital, although Bruce and I know that it's probably not
Shaking
likely
his head.
this year. Yeah.
The competition for capital to hospital for medically important equipment is very tough.
I have a question for staff, because part of their budget includes $23,377 for 10% construction contingency. And I know all projects do, as part of their budget. What happens if they never use that contingency, which is hard to believe, but how does that get handled by staff?
So of ours, yep, usually what happens, that money will come back to the city, and if they're not using it, that's a great thing. Haven't had that happen too often, but it gets reprogrammed as part of the, again, the overall CDBG planning process.
Yeah, because contingency usually would be change orders. Now, is the staff involved in the approval of change orders?
Staff does ultimately approve the change orders, with first the agency approving it, and then staff would have its approval.
Yes, Mr. Dre.
Currently, if I could summarize how the process works, the funds that are allocated to the organizations for capital improvement projects remain in the city account. The organizations execute construction contracts with in most cases, a general contractor, and the funds continue to remain in the city account. As work progresses, and the city staff approves everything, approves the contract, approves the contractor, conducts a pre-project meeting, conducts a pre-bid meeting. So we're involved all the way through. We ensure if there are funds leveraging the CDBG, that those funds are in place, and that's what the previous, what Mr. Topalian alluded to, that he now has his letter from the bank to show that they're fully funded. So we ensure that the construction project is fully funded, and so we will approve all change orders. We approve all progress payments, because progress payments have to be submitted to our finance division, and then checks are issued directly to the third-party general contractor from the city's account. So we are involved all the way through, including change orders, including the justification and the use of the contingency funds. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any comments?
Yeah, I have some questions about the low to moderate income clients. The list that you provided in response to the comment by staff.
Yes.
Now, all of these programs are currently going on at either another facility or the facility as it stands right now?
That's correct. We have space temporarily allocated to us in what's called the 1560 building on the campus. And that's space that is usually used as office space, but we have staff in there awaiting ultimately being transitioned over to this facility. There are offices and other build-outs that we'd like to complete, ultimately. But right now, they're temporarily located in another facility doing this work.
And then all of these programs would then be moved to this this facility after it was updated and
Yes.
and renovated.
The community health promotion programs, the health advocacy programs, and the community development programs really are the ones that would be moved. Obviously, chaplain services are going to stay where they are. But the other programs would be moved over there, and that's the bulk of the programs.
Not to minimize the importance of the fire sprinklers and notification systems, is that a requirement for the community centers that they need to have sprinklers? And I mean, I'm assuming the fire notification they have to have, but just what are the requirements for the sprinklers for the HUD's concern in the city?
Yeah, HUD's general requirement is that the buildings for which funds are being used comply with local, building and health and safety code requirements. So evidently, in order to continue to use this building, as they're proposing to, requires some health and safety upgrades, including fire sprinklers.
We originally came with a request for the other upgrades, and we were advised that we needed to do the fire and safety first. So that's why we're doing the fire and safety. It is a wood frame structure, unlike other structures. It's built in 1926, and as such, it just, has certain vulnerabilities.
It's a good thing it's not in Malibu.
Yeah.
It was our responsibility to take care of the fire life safety first,
Yeah.
even though it might be specifically not required by the city to do that first. But they will, if you do go to them with a significant amount of upgrades, they will make you do that also, bring up to current codes.
Oh.
So if we do that first, then we don't have to worry about when we come back and do ADA upgrades to the bathrooms and that type of thing, and office upgrades, and air conditioning upgrades in the future. So this will take care of that.
This is really, the destiny of the building hinges on this particular piece. If this gets done, then we'll keep the building around, regardless if we get future things funded. And we will do, improvements in there as we can over time. If we don't get this done, then the building becomes more of a liability for the hospital than it does an asset.
It's a very beautiful building,
It is a
looking at the
beautiful building.
pictures.
Yes. Yeah. I've often commented that I'm surprised it didn't become a historical landmark. I should say.
That's a different commission. Do you have enough to worry about?
We don't want to
Careful what you
suggest
wish
any other.
Okay, well, that's all I've got.
Yeah, I think they've kind of answered the questions that I had, and I had a similar line of questions, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
See Zara's brain already working.
What's that?
I see your brain already working.
So,
He's going to start pulling out his Excels.
you want to take a short recess and come back? Yes. So we'll take a short recess.
What time would you like to reconvene, Chairman Lee?
11:05.
12:05.
11:05, right?
Oh, 11:05, I'm sorry.
11:05,
We have public comment at, yes, that's past.
Hi, MSP 105. Want to take
Welcome back. Vice Chair, Mr. Gary Cornell, has joined us. Do we have any public comments? We're open for public comments.
Mr. Chair, just because Mr. Cornell just joined us, I wanted to emphasize that securing this fund for us will help us serve additional kids. Right now, we are spending $32,000 per month just for mortgage, and it'll be a shame for the building to sit there and we keep on paying that. So if you agree to vote for this program, we will be able to serve the kids sooner rather than later. And thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any more public comments?
No, you don't have to.
Okay.
Let them know.
So we'll close the public comments, and we'll go into process. Up on the screen, I guess we have the funding request for FY 08-09, and again, our money available to us. And what's been requested is there's a deficit of almost $300,000. So I guess we need to talk about, the validity of the programs first, and then if we all agree that, we need to fund these projects, then we need to find the money to fund these projects.
Now, right off the bat, if I may, let's change the $350,000 for the conversion of the warehouse to $345,000. That was corrected. Okay.
345?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, that's what the requesting.
Yeah, they modified their request. I'm sure they could use the $5,000, but I mean, let's get on exactly what was requested.
Was that factored in on the revised funds allocated on the total you just gave?
Yeah, that's what we have.
Yeah,
Okay.
So first of all, I'd like to say, and I think we all agree on this, every one of these three projects it's a good project.
Right.
There's no question. And directly relates back to the priorities of giving programs for the youth. So given that. And also the fact that we saw some of the projects that the city is working on. It's a good thing for us. It gives us a good comfort level of what's going on over there, and we should continue doing that.
Yeah.
We got a challenge ahead of us. As Efren said, they're all priorities. They're all something that fits the criteria of why we're up here. The only way that I can see this be fair and equitable to all of the vendors that bid on this RFP is to go across the board, reduce it, each one, to meet the funding budget that we have allocated to us. And that's the only way that I can see to be fair and equitable on this. I don't see any other way. If there is, I'd like to have the commissioner raise her hand if there's a better way to do it. And so we can get at it. But to be fair and equitable so that we can't say that we did this to that person, did that to that person, go across the budget, whatever it takes to reduce it by how many percent, 30, 35%, and do it in that manner.
That's one option, and I'm pretty sure we'll hear from other commissioners. I think the nature of the projects, unlike the social services, the capital fundings are either you fund it or you don't fund it type of, I think, nature. So anyways, would you like to say something?
And I think part of what you're saying also is this type of projects, it is with partial funding really creates a difficulty for the construction and being able to complete the projects, which is part of the reason for my questions of the different applicants.
Right.
And while I agree with you in terms of if we're only looking at these numbers, but we've been known to be a bit creative, and I think we're going to hear some creativity. So
we'll talk about that. So
I think we need to.
Commissioner Marion?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, while I appreciate the suggestion, I strongly disagree with it. I don't think it's feasible given, the nature of the programs and what we heard this morning. And in general, capital projects, I don't think that would work. So, that to me is definitely not an option at all. Now, as far as what we're going to do, I want to make some general comments. Efren commented on the availability of the city pre-designated projects to be here and make presentations and answer questions, and we all greatly appreciate that. But quite frankly, and this may get me in trouble, but I was a bit underwhelmed, honestly. On our evaluation summary, we weren't given sheets to rate the city pre-designated projects. We weren't given any type of packets. We were given a presentation, and I respect that greatly. But if I were to rate these programs based on what I heard today, some of them would fall beneath the three projects that I heard about. Specifically, the West Glendale ADA curb, ramp, and sidewalk. I know anytime the letters ADA are brought up, it springs to mind, the Americans with Disability Act. And I will tell you right now, the presentation that we heard today, I didn't see anything there that suggested that was actually what those monies were being spent for. Not to say that there's any dishonesty involved. I'm just saying what I saw today leads me to believe that that project specifically, and taking into account that I've spoken to Dr. Richard Espiritu on multiple occasions, who, for the public's knowledge, is one of the leading advocates of the ADA here in Glendale. There are sidewalks and curbs right now that don't meet ADA requirements that are in front of busy bus stops in CDBG neighborhoods. Unfortunately, what we saw today was a presentation on a project that would serve 370 private residents on side streets that are unlikely to be used by the public. And, I have serious questions about the efficacy of the use of those funds. Second, the Pacific Park Pool Project. I know that this is a high, if not the highest priority of some of the members of the Glendale City Council. And since we're here to serve, at their pleasure, and we're here to enact those priorities, I say this with some reticence, but at the same time, I have to say that given the comments by the assistant director of the program that, getting the funds this year or getting a portion of the funds next year doesn't affect the final completion date of the program, I'm not sure why, and this question wasn't answered. Why are they asking for that large of an amount when we have a deficit here? Personally, I'm going to strongly suggest that we dip into the pre-designated funds. And if that gets me in trouble, and if I'm not here next time around, you'll know what happened.
I'm sorry, I think we're going to get in trouble together.
No. It's not, you're alone here. We'll go as a team.
No.
I think we should definitely present the council with one option, given our recommendations. And it's unfortunate that the pre-designated projects aren't listed up there, and I know why they're not, because staff and the city doesn't want us to touch them. That's why they're pre-designated, but I think we should. And I think we should seriously discuss. The biggest question I think we have to answer before we do that is, do we think that these three projects, I think that these three projects, we decide what we want to fund them, and then we go look for the funding.
That's what we're asking right now for you to speak on. So, Commissioner Bagdasarian.
My vote would be to fund all three. My vote would have been to do two things. One is come up with our recommendation, then have an alternate recommendation. I guess I'm seeing a lot of people shake their heads, and I'll be willing to just have one recommendation, which is.
And I'm with you on your thinking. However, we've done that before.
You see, my fear is, in the absence of an alternate plan, City Council may just choose to take a measure of X% of every single applicant. And I think it's important for us to communicate that even though we believe we should tap into these pre-designated funds, but in the absence of that, I still want our votes to be heard that we believe these and these projects are more, appropriate, if you will. I don't want to use the word worthy.
And I understand where you're coming from, and I'm almost of the belief that they're probably listening right now.
Sure.
Or at least some of them are, and I think they also understand where we're coming from, and it's going to, I'm of the suggestion that we decide what we want to do. These are CDBG funds. Yes, we've had a different perspective, but I think we have a perspective. We present it, and they can either say no and go do their own thing.
And it falls upon, I'm sorry, Alec, go ahead.
You see, I'm afraid that would leave, last year we went through a similar exercise, and we were all in the meeting where the city council heard what we said, and they said, well, this is great, but this is what we want to do. And
I don't think they even said that.
Well, I mean, whether they said it's great or not, it's not the issue. The fact of the matter remains that they did what they wanted to do. And, we've been to other joint meetings where we've heard their comments, and pretty much the attitude, I guess I'm not going to be here next year either. The attitude has been, it's great that you guys are going through this exercise, but as long as you're within our line of thinking, it's great. If not, we'll do what we want to do. And having seen that, I just don't want to be in a position that we don't have any input whatsoever in the final decision.
I look at it a little bit different. I think our job, our task, is to take a look at what the nonprofits are doing out in the community, evaluate them, and make our decisions based on the best impact on the community. Based on the fact that some of these pre-designated projects can actually be funded again next year. The pool project, for example, this is the last year we're going to see them with $1.2 million.
This is the last year we're going to see it, according to them.
And the issue here is if we can only take $300,000 out of the pre-designated fund, we can fund every project here for 100%, which they're all worthy, When you're talking about, something that is not going to start, we don't need the money, but let's put $1.2 million aside, and a project that 800 kids would start being served, or so many kids would start getting served as soon as December timeframe, for us to sit back and say, well, we're not going to fund them, we're going to fund this other program, which nothing is going to happen on it until next year. To me, it just makes no sense.
And again, with all fairness to the city programs, I don't believe they were given the direction to come with a presentation to us similar to what we had, and I completely agree with you, sorry. We didn't have comparable information. At the same time, the projects that were presented by the three nonprofits were very well put together. With the exception of one that I have questions with, and maybe we'll get the answer yet still. I think that's just part of the process of going through this every year. But all these three projects are ready to go.
I agree.
They are ready to go right now. And we said this the same thing last year with the youth center. They were ready to go. They were ready to pull permits, and here we are a year later. Still doing the same thing.
Alec, we did the same thing last year. You remember on the Pacific Park, where we allocated $200,000 and the council rebuffed us. I have a question for staff, Mr. Duran, and direct. What Mr. Merriam was saying, it was my understanding and belief, and you can hear me out or call me on the carpet on this, but these predesignated ones cannot be touched, already predesignated by the council. These are their pet projects, and that we cannot touch them. Is that pretty much correct on that?
Pet projects, you said, Gary? I don't know if that's the right terminology to use. But
Okay, commissioners, fellow commissioners, I think you're stating that you support all three projects here, right? So let's stay focused
I think
on
it's a matter of stating, but it's a matter of priorities. And
Right.
if I had limited funds, how do I want to allocate?
Right.
And I think
But-
I don't want that part of it to go undiscussed.
Right. We'll discuss that on the second part, but what we want to determine here is that do we want to fund these three projects? And then we have to discuss, how are we going to achieve that? And I guess it's my turn to, make a statement. I am of the opinion, to support these three projects. These three agencies has really demonstrated their need for this funding, and I'm of the same opinion with the Commissioner Miriam and also Commissioner Oliveros that this designated funds, the way it's been set aside, and the funding requirement from the assistant director was I think it was the summer of 2009, which is still another year away, for the funding requirement. So I think there is a time frame which we can work with. So if this was the last of the CDBG money, 1.2 million, then I think whatever is difference, that 1.2 million will become available next year in the CDBG funding and capital funding. So I think portion of that could be funded using CDBG fund, and then we can use some of those funds to fund these three projects. I guess the way we can maybe fund all three projects here.
I would agree. I think if I go back on the three pre-designated projects, I haven't heard anybody here talk about doing anything with code enforcement program. That's been proven. That's what it's supposed to do. Shouldn't touch that.
I agree.
The Pacific Park project, it's a year and a half away.
Right.
They still have the opportunity to come back next year. The council can also pre-designate funds for next year.
And you know what? We'll promise not to touch them.
Right. No, we're going to take a position on supporting that next year. Also, and then the West Glendale ADA curb ramp, and there are a lot of questions with that in terms of how many of those funds actually do go towards ADA improvements. There are a lot of construction items mixed into the whole project, including sidewalks and other things. So I myself have questions about that. I would suggest that we take out 150 out of each of those two pre-designated funds, come up with the extra 300. with the condition that we do need to see backup from the youth center for the elevator, because I'm still not sure what that 110,000 pays for.
I fully agree.
ADA is only 125,000, isn't it?
I'm sorry, then, okay. Then I guess we'll talk about alternatives.
I would even go as far as saying, we'll just have our projects funded, and the city council can look at the merit of, I see your point about our voting on the other two, but we can go in with a recommendation that we want these three projects funded 100%. Our recommendation is to look into these two and decide what they want to do.
I agree with that, because, now we're tapping into two pre-designated projects.
Yeah, I think if we just
I
decide,
don't think that'll go
the pool
well.
is cleaner. We're not, the pool is cleaner. We're not talking about the merits of it. We're just talking about the fact that the funds are not needed this year. So we're seeing other projects where the sprinklers are needed because of use and occupancy. The other two projects, the kids could start getting served ASAP if these funds are allocated 800 kids there. The others, in the other instance. So to me, it just makes no sense to take this money away from these organizations and then allocate it to a project that the funds are not needed until next year. If anything, I would have taken even more money and give. Last year, we decided to give $100,000 more to SCF. I think this year I would even give more money to Homitman and just say, given the fact that you only came to us with your immediate first phase project, given the fact that you're not charging for project administration, many of the other things that are customary, ordinary for us to get included in the budget, the fact that you did not get, the fact that this is your bare minimum, I would even vote to increase their funding from $350,000 and take away from the pool project and subject to funding it next year.
I like your thinking. I wouldn't be prepared to support that, only because I think we may be pushing the envelope a little too much here.
Right, that'd be like walking into a bank with presidents' masks on.
But I do like the idea of funding the projects and letting the council decide where they want to flex their funds for next year.
Okay.
Along with our commitment that if we are here next year, we would support, obviously, the balance for the.
Sure, absolutely. Nobody arguing the merits of the pool and having a pool.
Mr. Duran, I guess also you can share with us, your insight into the, the CDBG funding being held in one project for such a long time, and how that, is reflected with the HUD people.
Mm-hmm. Certainly, members of the CDBG Advisory Committee, it would be, if we needed to choose a project to reallocate funds from between the city's pre-designated projects, it would probably behoove us to recommend reprogramming from the Pacific Park Pool Project, only because we do have an expenditure rate requirement from HUD. And if we hold too much funds in abeyance for one project and it accumulates, then we begin to get our own financial review from HUD, and they begin to question us on why we're not spending CDBG funds in a timely manner. So we might want to include that brief discussion in our staff report to City Council, make it easier for them to, if they're trying to choose between the ADA improvement project, which the ADA funds will be spent within the year, so that would be one advantage of sticking with that project. Then maybe the reprogramming funds from Pacific Park Pool, and maybe even with the recommendation in the staff report, a recommendation from the advisory committee that the committee would like to replenish any funds taken away from the Pacific Park Pool in the 09-10 program planning. And then we'll have the funding strategy that I alluded to earlier would be covered.
And I'd like to remind the public that everybody who's watching saw the assistant director clearly state, and I asked the question 3 or 4 times, what substantive effect would it have on the completion date of the pool project? And he said none. So I fully support that option. In fact, I fully support what Efren said, that we fund all 3 projects fully. With the ACF project being contingent upon us receiving the information, which I'm sure is there. They've come to us in the past, and I have absolutely zero doubt in my mind that, we'll receive that document in a timely manner. Where we take it from, this can get me in trouble. I would say take it from the pool project. I mean, I don't like the West Glendale curb ramp and sidewalk project much, I'll tell you that. But maybe I don't have enough details on that.
But let's reword what you said, because you're not saying take it from the pool project. You're saying we're going to reallocate it to next year.
Right.
There we go.
Not taking it away.
Okay, that's better. Thank you.
That's correct.
Do we have a motion on the floor?
The motion is to fund all three projects, contingent on receiving detailed information for the elevator. Yes?
Well, after you make your motion, I have a comment.
Okay.
Okay. My motion again is to fund all three projects, contingent on receiving detailed information for the elevator project on the youth center, and that the balance that we need be reallocated from the current year pool project with a commitment that we will fund that again next year from the CDBG funds.
I second that.
Mr. Tran?
Yes, Chairman Lee, we did receive additional information from Mr. Topalian regarding an itemized cost estimate for the youth center project. I'm not sure if it provides the detail we're looking for on the elevator, but I'll pass it out and you can determine that.
One page?
Yeah, it looks like it's one page.
9114.
I'll tell you what it is.
Chairman Lee, I think
This was,
he wants to speak. I'm not sure.
Oh,
Efren, is your motion to fund as requested?
Correct.
Okay.
Well, what I'm looking at here is an overall budget, so it'll take a little time to go through and figure this out. I guess my suggestion would be that they prepare something finite and detailed in regards to the proposal.
And I have an issue with that. I guess it could be part of the motion. I mean, I don't know to what degree that should have been cut. If there was any issues with it, if there were any issues with it, it should have been cut when they submitted their RFP. And to come in and like an hour or two before and make that part of the motion that is passing, I have an issue. I think, we should see not that, Efren knows about, Moses knows about it as it's, going through its process. I'm sure he will look out for it and make sure that it's submitted, but I just don't think it should really be part of the wording of the motion because, again, it wasn't something that was cut before and on.
Well, I think what needs to be clear to any organization that comes in front of us at any time is that they need to give us a complete package, whether the staff missed it on their weakness analysis or not. But that is my motion.
I agree. I guess that's your motion. That's your motion.
Ms. Correa, you have a comment?
Let me just comment a little bit about that. We did receive, the comment, the weakness was that it wasn't clear what the funding was being requested, and the applicant did provide a response, but it still didn't suffice for us. However, the cost breakdown that we have is generally what we've taken before for a itemization of what cost breakdown, because we know it's always estimates, and when you get out to bid and you get out to the real world of CDBG bidding, and unfortunately the bids do come out a little higher than what's estimate. What we didn't have was exactly the details of the elevator and what was involved as far as the cab, and I understand it is a very expensive material. It's 3 stops, a 3-story building. We had a similar project for an elevator for a 2-story at about $60,000, but that did not include the cab. Of course, we're not contractors. We don't get all estimates, but this is generally what we take on face value is what is generally a contractor's estimate of the work.
The reason I'm suggesting what I'm suggesting is not because I question the project. I don't. The budget that they provided is an overall construction project. I don't question that either. The reason is because when your staff goes out over the next year to try and monitored this project, you don't really have anything to compare to that says this is where $110,000 are going. We know it's elevator-related, we know it's an elevator, but it may be other items. That's the only reason. I want to have something on
May
the
I-
file that you can react to.
But when we
Yes,
do
Mr.
bid,
Chair.
I'm sorry, Mr. Olivar, just to answer your question, we do bid out, this will be bid out separately from the entire project. So we will have a
understand that.
separate
I understand that, but
package.
what I'm saying is, right now, $110,000 on this proposal they're not explicit enough as to how 110 are going.
Yeah, let me ask this question here. When you develop this 110,000 budget proposal, and when we're actually, award the contract, and then when we go out for bidding, we do have a competitive bidding from 2 or 3 sources here, right? So that we will have that backup. And, I trust, I believe our monitoring system is in place so that, any funds that will be left over from the program, from this competitive bidding process, will come back to CDBG anyways. So, if maybe you can
I guess
restate your
I'm not
motion.
making myself very clear here, but my point being that they're asking for $110,000.
Right.
When I look at this proposal, it says for an elevator.
Mhm.
In my view, an elevator is an elevator. You purchase an elevator from a company. If that's what it is, then great. You're going to get 3 bids, and if the elevator comes in at $60,000 or $70,000 or $80,000, whatever number it is, then that's what the CDBG funds will be used for. If there are any other items that are presumably attached to this elevator that are included here, I'm not seeing that.
I think what the issue here is someone could be asking to replace an elevator in an existing structure where the elevator is operating now. It's for whatever reason needs to be replaced, and then there's a new building that is going on, as we heard, is to build the infrastructure to support that elevator and the shaft and so forth. Now, whether that could be worded as such, that elevator and the supporting infrastructure for the elevator, because it's a new building, versus for an elevator that is being replaced in an existing building. I think that's the. I mean, we're playing with words. I think we're all agreeing that.
I'll go back to my motion.
But for the benefit of this committee, could you come up and maybe restate your scope of work as to what this will cover?
Before
you for
even
the
you do
opportunity.
that, I'm sorry, before you even do that, let me ask you a question. Would you have any problems providing the information that's being asked for?
We'll get it from our general. It was put into the thing. The document you have, because of this late moment, our general is at the job site, some job site. I have no idea where. I have his wife chasing him, everyone chasing him. What I was able to get from our office was what we turned into the bank to get approval on the loan, which was the general construction cost, which included everything, which the bank had approved our loan on. And I said, well, suffice it that at least I'm giving them this much. I also, if I remember correctly, on every line item, like we asked for heating and air conditioning, it's turned in according to the construction, the general's estimate of what it would cost for electrical and heating and air conditioning. And that's what's submitted. That's what we had submitted in the past. That's what was accepted, with the assumption that it goes out to bid, and then the lowest bid gets it, and the city oversees it. But you go on, all we can go on is the general's estimate of what it was going to cost. This was his estimate of what he thought. And so any money left over absolutely would be turned back. But this is for the concrete work, the infrastructure of the elevator and the elevator. So I understand the question that maybe just an elevator would cost $60,000, I would assume. I don't know. But by putting in the concrete and everything else and all the electrical, all of the other stuff, I would assume that it comes out a great deal more than $60,000 as a layman.
If that's what your request is for, then that's what I want to make sure we see, because it's not in the proposal.
Yeah,
Just
you know what?
$110,000.
Actually, let me, Mr. Topalian, it says construction costs, it gives us a total construction cost, and then it says CDBG request out of that total construction cost is $110,000. And then underneath construction costs, it says next page for details. Unfortunately, that next page isn't there. And that's what we're referring to. There is the breakdown that you're talking about of the concrete and the electricity and the air conditioning. I didn't see that. So that's all we're asking for is in the next week or so or the next 10 days.
I don't see any problem with getting that. Specifically to your question, I don't see a problem getting that in a timely fashion.
And I don't think you'll have a problem with that. I just want to put it on the
Yeah,
record
yeah.
so they know how to manage it, that's all.
And I have no problem then, given that answer, seconding again.
It's the total elevator. I mean, it's not just, yeah.
Commissioner McTerson, you are the one that who raised that question, so then I'm going to withdraw that comment for the
Given
motion to
the
stand?
explanations, I'll withdraw my comment.
Okay, so then that, your motion stands.
Motion, and we had a second.
Okay, we have a second now. Roll call, please.
Advisory Member Zaria Mirian.
Aye.
Advisory Member Alec Baldessarian.
Yes.
Vice Chair Gary Cornell.
Yes.
Advisory Member Efrain Olivares.
Yes.
Chair Chankley.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, well, just for the public, again, the most important part of this process is the feedback that the council and that we receive and the staff receives from the public. If we don't receive any feedback, then that may be construed to, say that, what, there isn't support for this in the community. And, I want to clearly state, we understand that we're here to make, the council's lives easier, to go over in detail these projects when they can't do that. And I take that responsibility very seriously. Given that, I think all of you at home have seen that this committee thoroughly looks at the details, asks pertinent questions, and deliberates fully each and every item that comes before us. And you saw here that we have, again, this year, a unanimous vote to support our funding proposal. I personally want to thank my fellow commissioners who have sat through this sometimes arduous and difficult proceeding. And I just want to state again my thanks to the staff for, without the staff's hard work, we wouldn't have this information in order to, ask these questions, make these deliberations. So I want to say thank you. And most importantly, thanks to everybody, all the citizens of Glendale. Your input is what has us here today. And that's all I've got to say. Thank you, everybody.
I'd just like to echo your comments. The staff always gave us really good reports, which is what leads us into the in-depth discussions that we have. And hopefully we'll see each other at the council presentation. We were all there last year, and shows our commitment to this committee. And I thank all of you for being part of it. Thank you.
I would just like to mention what Mr. Merriam said. It's not just what staff has or what the feedback they're going to get. It's the citizens that are going to be before council, the council itself. I think by our unanimous vote that we're all on board here as to the seriousness of how we feel at this time, what we saw, what we looked at, what we reviewed, that these projects and organizations that are before us are not only priority, but essential to continue in the best interest of this community. I like to, as we did last year, and hope everyone, when Mr. Duran notifies us when the council will be acting on this, that this body can show a presence of support on this. It's we're putting ourselves on a limb and interfering with the jurisdiction of how the council is. Actually, all the council is the people that are in the hot seat. We try to make it easy for them, but if we disagree, this is what we're up here for. We're not rubber stamps. And we pointed out this, and I hope when it does come to that point that we all can show a support by being present and having our arguments, as we have right now, before council as to why we feel this way. I just have one thing, Efren, I wanted to ask you on as far as the funding here. My concern is the predesignated projects. Is this going to be across the board reduced from all the predesignated projects, or is it going to be taken from one, or how is this going to be handled, or is the council going to make that decision?
I think what we finally agreed on was on having it withdrawn from the current pool project with the commitment that we will allot it next year in the next cycle of CDBG.
That's what we decided for it to
That's what we voted on.
We're simply reallocating the year, but the amount stays the same, the commitment stays the same.
And I also want to point out the fact that we're the first folks that had the opportunity to look at this proposal. It's very, very possible that once City Council sees our decisions, they'll be in agreement with us 100%. I'd like to make sure that we don't necessarily come across here, expressing or, that we think they will disagree. I think it's very possible that once they see our recommendation and hear the reasoning for it, that they will agree with our recommendation.
I think we would all agree that it's a very logical, creative way to get all the projects done.
It's correct. And the same thing with the other social service projects. We don't see anything wrong with any other projects, and we wish we had the money to fund all of them. Just have to make some.
Was your language in the motion regarding the pool as far as that allotment here, if they did accept this, that this would, that language is in the motion?
I thought it was.
Yes.
Is
that in the motion?
Yeah, to get it from the full project.
Right.
Yeah. Well, it is an honor and privilege for me to serve with my colleagues here who put the interest of the Glendale community before anything else. And it's been labor of love, and it's been a fun ride. So hopefully that what we have done here, that the council, shares the same view as we do. And one of the things that I guess we've always stayed together as a unit, showed our solidarity, and again, I am very privileged to serve as one of the members here in this commission. So, do we have a motion to adjourn? Oh, comments, please.
Yes, Chairman Lee. Very quickly, speaking of public input, we will be having a public hearing on the recommendations of the committee scheduled on February 28th at 7 p.m. at the Pacific Park Community Center. And then we're planning to meet with the City Council Housing Authority on either April 1st or April 8th. And our next CDBG Advisory Committee meeting is currently scheduled for May 7th.
What day was that?
May 7th.
27th?
May 7th.
Can we have a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Do we need to open public communications for the record and close it?
I thought we did already.
Did? Okay.
Yeah, right.
I'll move to adjourn.
So move.
I'll second.
Great.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.